She didn't cry. That was the thing nobody in Silver Creek, Montana could explain afterward. The woman had just been handed a return train ticket by the man she'd crossed half a country to marry publicly in front of every soul on that platform, and she did not shed a single tear. She just stood there, the leather handle of her suitcase gripping in both hands, her chin lifted exactly 1 degree higher than it had been before he walked away. And then she turned around. If a woman who lost everything still had the courage to turn around and face a town full of strangers, you need to stay until the very end of this story. Subscribe to our channel right now, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to Silver Creek, Montana, the summer of 1884, and find out what happened to Clara Whitmore, the mail-order bride nobody wanted, and the one man who was paying attention when everyone else looked away. The train had been 3 days late out of Chicago, and for 3 days, Clara Whitmore had sat in the same hard wooden seat watching America change outside the window from brick and iron into something vast and brown and indifferent. She had eaten almost nothing. Not because she wasn't hungry, but because every penny she had left was folded into a small cloth envelope tucked inside her boot, and she had already made the calculation twice that morning. The envelope had to last. Whatever Silver Creek turned out to be, whatever Nathan Cole turned out to be, that money had to carry her through the first difficult weeks until she was established. She had told herself this 100 times on that train. Established. Like she was a business. Like she was a firm plan, and not a 24-year-old woman who had buried both her parents within 8 months of each other and sold her mother's sewing machine and her father's pocket watch, and the small writing desk she had learned to read on all to buy a ticket west, and the hope that a man she had only communicated with through 6 letters would look at her and see something worth keeping. The letters had been careful and formal. Nathan Cole had written on good stationery. He had described his ranch in Silver Creek, the cattle operation, the 3 hired men, the house that needed a woman's management. He had not described himself in any particular warmth, but Clara had told herself that was simply a man's way. Her father had never been warm on paper either, and he had loved her mother for 31 years. She had written back just as carefully. She had described herself honestly, 24 years old, educated, capable of hard work, experienced in household management, from caring for her parents during their illnesses. She had not pretended to know cattle ranching, because she didn't. She had not pretended to be anything other than what she was. She thought that was the right thing to do. Honesty seemed like the only currency that would hold its value on a frontier. The train pulled into Silver Creek just after 11 in the morning, on a Tuesday in July 1884, and the heat that came through the window when she lifted it was like opening a bread oven. Clara smoothed the front of her best dress, navy blue wool, which she understood immediately was a catastrophic choice for Montana. In July, lifted her suitcase from the rack above her head, tucked her family Bible under her arm, and walked off that train with her shoulders as straight as she could hold them. The platform was not large. There were perhaps 40-50 people scattered across it and the length of the street beyond, going about their Tuesday. Several of them looked up when the train arrived, as people do. And then, several of them kept looking, because word traveled fast in a town this size, and word had traveled that Nathan Cole's mail-order bride was arriving on this train. Clara stepped off the last step onto the platform boards and looked for a man who matched what she had imagined. She found him quickly because he was standing in the center of things the way men who consider themselves the center of things always stand, with his thumbs in his belt and a looseness in his posture that communicated comfort, ownership, ease. Nathan Cole was perhaps 40 years old, broad across the chest, with a face that might have been called handsome if the expression on it hadn't been the one it was wearing right now. He was looking at her the way a man looks at an invoice that doesn't add up. Clara walked toward him. She extended her hand. "Mr. Cole," she said. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I'm very glad to finally—" "You're not what I pictured," he said. He didn't take her hand. Clara kept it extended for exactly 2 seconds, because withdrawing it too quickly would look like flinching, and she had made a private decision on that train that she would not flinch in this town. Then she lowered it to her side. I described myself accurately in my letters, she said. You described yourself as capable of running a ranch household. I did, and I am. You look like you've never been outside a city in your life. He said it without cruelty and without particular gentleness, either the way a man states a fact about weather. I need a woman who knows livestock, who can work a difficult kitchen in difficult conditions, who's been through hard seasons. He tilted his head slightly still, looking at her doing some kind of internal accounting. You're wearing wool in July. I'm aware that was a poor decision, Clara said. I'll correct it. There's nothing to correct, Nathan Cole said. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. He held it out toward her. That'll cover your passage back to Boston. The eastbound comes through Thursday. You can stay at the boarding house on Milner Street in the meantime. He paused. I'm sorry for the trouble. The platform had gone quiet, not silent. The town was still moving. Horses were still shifting somewhere down the street. A door banged. But the people nearest to them had stopped their conversations, and Clara could feel the particular quality of attention that means everyone is listening while pretending not to. She looked at the envelope. She had calculated her remaining money twice that morning. The envelope would solve the immediate arithmetic. It would get her back to Boston, where she had no home, and no position, and nothing waiting for her, except the particular kindness of friends who had already extended that kindness as far as it would stretch. She had sold her mother's sewing machine for this. She looked up from the envelope to Nathan Cole's face. He was already settling back into himself. The transaction completed in his mind, his attention beginning to drift towards something beyond her left shoulder. Mr. Cole, she said. Her voice came out even, which surprised her. You wrote 6 letters to me over 4 months. In those letters you described what you required in a household manager and in a wife. I answered each letter honestly. I told you my age, my education, my experience, and my limitations. I told you I had no frontier experience and that I was willing to learn. You wrote back on 3 occasions that this was acceptable. She paused. I would like to know which of those things you found acceptable enough to allow me to sell everything I own to make this journey, and which of them you find unacceptable now. Nathan Cole's jaw tightened slightly. It's nothing personal. It's entirely personal, Clara said. That is rather the nature of marriage arrangements. Someone nearby, a woman older standing at the edge of the crowd that had consolidated without appearing to make a soft sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else. Nathan Cole's eyes moved to the crowd. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt, more like the awareness that an audience changes the arithmetic of a situation. He took a half step toward her and lowered his voice. Take the envelope, Miss Whitmore. It's a fair offer under the circumstances. The circumstances, Clara repeated. You're not suited to this life. You've spoken with me for 90 seconds. Some things are apparent quickly. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the sewing machine. She thought about the writing desk. She thought about 3 days on a hard seat, eating almost nothing because every penny had to last. She thought about her mother, who had crossed an ocean from Ireland at 19 years old, with nothing but the clothes on her back, and had built a life that lasted 31 years, and produced 2 children and a house full of small dignities. She took the envelope from his hand. She did not put it in her bag. She held it at her side and looked at Nathan Cole until he looked away first, which he did, and then she turned around to face the town. The crowd on the platform had grown. There were perhaps 30 people in her direct line of sight, most of them displaying the careful blank expression of people who want to watch something without being caught watching. A woman near the general store was whispering to the woman next to her. 2 men by the livery were grinning at each other. A boy of about 12 was staring at her with the uncomplicated directness of children who haven't yet learned that staring is rude. Clara stood up very straight and took a slow breath of the hot July air. Do not cry, she told herself. Do not cry, do not fold, do not give them the satisfaction of a scene. She didn't know yet where she was going. The boarding house on Milner Street, she supposed. Thursday, the train east, back to Boston, back to nothing, back to starting over from a position even worse than the one she had left, because now she had even less. and the humiliation of a failed mail-order arrangement on top of it. But she wasn't going to show any of that on this platform. She was going to stand here until her legs steadied, and then she was going to walk off this platform with the same shoulders she had walked onto it with. "Ma'am?" The voice came from her left and slightly behind her. It was quiet, not soft exactly, but contained the way a voice sounds when the person using it has learned to be heard without raising it. Clara turned toward it. The man standing there was not someone she had noticed before. He was standing a few feet back from the main press of the crowd, not quite part of it, which was perhaps why she'd missed him. He was tall, lean through the shoulders, in the way of men who do physical work without putting on performance of it, with dark hair, going slightly gray at the temples, and a face that had been worked on by weather for a good many years. He was perhaps 35. He was holding his hat in both hands in front of him, turning it slowly by the brim, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately place. Not pity. She had already braced herself for pity, and this wasn't it. Not the gleeful, barely concealed interest of the crowd around him. Something quieter. Something that felt improbably like recognition. "Beg your pardon for intruding," he said. "My name's Ethan Walker. I run the Walker Ranch about 4 miles out of town North Road." He paused, still turning the hat brim slowly in his hands. "I couldn't help but overhear some of what just passed, and I understand if you'd rather be left alone. But I've got a situation at my ranch and I want to make you a fair offer before you make any decisions about Thursday's train." Clara studied him. She had just spent the last 4 months corresponding with a man who turned out to be nothing like she'd imagined, and she was not inclined toward credulity about unfamiliar men and their offers. "What kind of situation?" she said. "My housekeeper passed away 6 weeks ago. Woman named Ruth Hadley. She'd been with the ranch 12 years, and she kept things running proper. Since she passed, the men are eating bad, the house is a wreck, and I'm spending half my attention every day on problems that ought to be handled, so I can spend that attention on cattle where it belongs." He met her eyes directly. He didn't look away or fidget the way men sometimes do when they're stretching a truth. "I need a capable person who can take over the household management. 3 months to start, wages paid fair and in full at the end of each month. Your own room in the house, your own meals, and whatever arrangement you need to feel safe and respectable. No other expectations. Not a marriage arrangement." He said that last part carefully and clearly. "A job. A fair one." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You heard enough of that conversation to know I have no frontier experience," she said. "I did." "And that doesn't trouble you, at? Ruth Hadley didn't know a thing about ranching when she came to work for my father 20 years ago. Ethan Walker said. "She learned. The men she cooked for showed her what they needed, and she figured the rest. That's how most things get done out here." He paused. "What I saw on this platform just now, the way you handled yourself, tells me more about a person's character than whether they know how to salt a side of beef." Clara glanced back at the platform. Nathan Cole had already gone. The crowd was slowly dispersing, losing interest now that the spectacle was over, conversations resuming. A few people were still watching her and Walker with that same studied, casual attention. "People will talk," she said. It wasn't an objection. It was a statement of fact she needed acknowledged. "People talk about everything in a town this size," Ethan Walker said. "They'll talk no matter what you decide. The question's whether what they say matters to you more than what you do." Clara looked at the envelope in her hand. She looked at the man in front of her. She thought about the sewing machine and the writing desk and 3 days on a hard train seat, and she thought about the particular future that waited for her back in Boston, which was not a future at all, but a slow subsiding. She thought about her mother, 19 years old, crossing an ocean. 3 months, she said. "Fair wages and my own room." "Yes, ma'am." "And if I find at the end of 3 months that the arrangement doesn't suit me, I leave with what I've earned and no hard feelings on either side." "That's exactly right." Clara tucked the return ticket envelope into her bag, not because she expected to use it, but because she was not a woman who threw away options, and she picked up her suitcase. "Then I suppose you'd better tell me about this ranch of yours, Mr. Walker," she said. "Starting with what the men are eating, that's bad enough to concern you." Something moved across Ethan Walker's face. Not a smile exactly, more the shape of one contained like the voice. He settled his hat back onto his head. "Beans," he said. "Mostly beans. And biscuits that could stop a bullet if anybody was inclined to try." Clara almost smiled back. She caught it before it became a full one. "I can work with beans," she said. He picked up her suitcase from beside her feet without asking, which she noted and allowed, and they walked off the platform together, and the town of Silver Creek watched them go. The whispers followed them down the street. "That's Ethan Walker. Took her on as a housekeeper. Well, we'll see how long that lasts. Woman like that soft-hand city ways. We'll see." Clara heard every word. She kept walking. The road north out of Silver Creek was dusty and unshaded, and after 20 minutes in the wagon beside Ethan Walker, Clara had removed her jacket and was deeply regretting the wool dress. The Montana landscape spread out around them in all directions in a way that would have been beautiful if she hadn't been too hot and too tired and too thoroughly wrung out by the morning to give it proper attention. "The men you'll be managing," Ethan said after they'd been riding in silence long enough that she'd started wondering if he was a man who didn't talk much. "There are 5 of them full-time. Tom Briggs, he's my foreman, been with me 8 years. Good man. Doesn't give his trust easy, but once you have it, you have it. Hector Reyes, best hand. I've got with horses, doesn't say much in English, but understands everything. The Donnelly brothers. Pete and Sam, they've been here 4 years, always arguing with each other and always working together when it matters. And then there's Billy Mack, youngest, 19 years old, thinks he knows everything and is about halfway right." He paused. "They're not bad men. They're tired and they're eating badly and they miss Ruth, though most of them won't say so directly. Were they close to her?" "She'd been there 12 years, Ethan said. "She knew which one of them couldn't sleep during thunderstorms and which one was saving up to send money home to his mother. She remembered their birthdays, and she never once made them feel small for being hired hands." He was quiet for a moment. "They're not going to transfer that attachment to you overnight. I want you to know that up front, so you're not discouraged if the first few weeks are hard." Clara appreciated the honesty. It was more than she'd gotten in 6 letters of correspondence. "What happened to Ruth?" she asked. "If you don't mind saying." "Heart," Ethan said simply. "The doctor said she'd had a bad one for years, and she'd never told anybody. She just went to sleep one night and didn't wake up." He looked at the road ahead. "That was 6 weeks ago. We found her in the morning." "I'm sorry," Clara said. "She was a good woman." They rode in silence for a while. Clara watched the landscape. The heat pressed down. Somewhere in the distance there were mountains, and she thought that on a different day in a different life she might stop and simply look at them. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Ethan," he said. "Out here formality's more trouble than it's worth." "Ethan," she said. "Why did you step forward back there on the platform? You could have let me get on Thursday's train and you'd have found another housekeeper eventually." He thought about this for a moment. He seemed like a man who thought before answering, which she found she liked. "Couple of reasons," he said finally. "First one is practical. I need somebody now, not eventually, and you were right there, and clearly capable. And the second reason," he looked at her sideways. The hat brim shadowed most of his face, and she couldn't quite read his expression. "The way you stood on that platform," he said. "Most people, after what just happened to you, they fold. They cry, or they get angry, or they disappear inside themselves. You didn't do any of those things. You just stood there like you were deciding what to do next." He looked back at the road. "That's a kind of person I can work with. That's a kind of person worth making room for." Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at her hands in her lap, the hands Nathan Cole had decided were too soft, too city-bred, too unprepared for the life he wanted. She turned them over slowly. "I should tell you," she said, "that I've never managed anything larger than my parents' house in Boston. I've never cooked for more than 4 people at once. I don't know anything about cattle or horses or—" "I know," Ethan Walker said. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I didn't ask you to." I'm telling you this so you know what you're actually getting, Clara said. Not what you're hoping I'll turn out to be. What I actually am right now today stepping off that train. I will work as hard as I am able. I learn quickly. I don't complain and I don't make excuses. But I make mistakes and I will make some at your ranch, especially in the beginning, and I don't want you looking at me in 3 weeks the way Nathan Cole looked at me this morning. Ethan Walker pulled the wagon over slightly to let a rider pass in the other direction, and in the pause that followed, he turned and looked at her directly, for the first time since they'd left the platform. His eyes were gray-blue, and in the bright midday sun, she could see them clearly, and what she saw in them was the same thing she hadn't been able to place on the platform. Not pity, not interest of the spectator kind. Something more even than that. Something she thought with a cautious corner of her mind might be respect. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Clara, I want to tell you one thing that is true about my ranch and how I run it. You are allowed to not know something. You are never allowed to pretend you know something you don't. If you do the first, we'll figure it out together. If you do the second, we'll have a problem. Can you work with that?" Clara looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I can work with that." He nodded once, turned back to the road, clicked to the horses, and they rolled on. The Walker Ranch appeared ahead of them 20 minutes later, and Clara's first clear thought was that it was going to need work. Not the buildings themselves, those were solid log and plank, built by someone who knew what they were doing and intended them to last. But there was a general aspect of neglect that she recognized from her parents' house in the months when they had both been too sick to manage things properly. The kind of neglect that isn't carelessness, but grief where things don't get done. Not because nobody cares, but because the person who used to care is gone, and nobody else has figured out yet how to take on the shape of that absence. Tom Briggs was standing by the barn when they pulled in, and he looked at Ethan, and then at Clara, and then at Ethan again, with the expression of a man who has learned to reserve judgment, and is currently reserving it very firmly. "Tom," Ethan said, "this is Clara Whitmore. She's going to be managing the house and the kitchen starting today. Introduce her to the men when they come in this evening. I'd appreciate if you helped her get oriented." Tom Briggs had a square jaw and a gray mustache and eyes the color of creek water in November. He looked at Clara for a long moment. "Ma'am," he said. The word contained no particular warmth and no particular hostility. It was a placeholder. "Mr. Briggs," Clara said. She looked at him steadily, the way she had looked at Nathan Cole on the platform, and she thought she saw something shift almost imperceptibly in his face. The same quality of recalculation. This one doesn't fold easy. "I'd be grateful for the orientation," she continued. "I'll need to see the kitchen first. I want to know what I'm working with before this evening." "Kitchen's through the main house back left," Tom Briggs said. He paused. "Fair warning, it's not what you're used to." "I'm not used to anything out here," Clara said. "So I don't imagine I'll have expectations to be disappointed." Tom looked at Ethan again. Ethan said nothing, just handed off the wagon reins and started toward the house. Clara picked up her suitcase. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "when do the men typically eat in the evening?" 6 o'clock, he said. "When it's ready, which lately that's been whenever Sam Donnelly figures out what to do with whatever's in the larder." "What's in the larder?" he told her. Clara thought for a moment. "All right," she said. "Tell whoever's been doing the cooking that he can stand down tonight. I'll have something on the table by 6. Tom Briggs looked at her the way a man looks at a bridge he isn't sure will hold his weight. "Yes, ma'am," he said in that same placeholder voice. Clara walked into the ranch house, set her suitcase down beside the door, and found the kitchen. It was worse than bad. Not dirty. Someone had made an effort at basic cleanliness, she could see that, but chaotic in the particular way of spaces, managed by people who are competent at their work, but not at running a household. The wrong things stored in the wrong places. Pots and pans with no logical organization. The stove badly maintained. Stores that had been used in the wrong order, so that what was left was a puzzle she'd have to solve before she could use any of it. She stood in the middle of it and took it all in. Then she took off her jacket, folded it over the back of the nearest chair, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. At 6 o'clock that evening, the 5 ranch hands came through the door of the house to find the kitchen organized, the stove working properly, and the table set with plates and cups that had been washed until they actually shone. There was a pot of beef and vegetable stew. She had found enough of the right things in the larder to pull it together if she was creative about it, and fresh biscuits that rose properly, and cornbread and a pot of strong coffee that smelled like the thing itself rather than the memory of it. They came in wary, and they sat down silent. These 5 tired men who had been managing on beans and bad biscuits for 6 weeks and who had learned to be careful about being hopeful. Sam Donnelly took the first bite. He chewed. He set his spoon down. He looked at his brother Pete. Pete took a bite. There was a long pause. "Lord Almighty," Pete Donnelly said quietly. "Language," Tom Briggs said. "Tom, I don't reckon the Lord minds under the circumstances." Billy Mack. The youngest, 19 years old, was already on his second spoonful. He looked up at Clara where she stood near the stove, and his face held an expression of uncomplicated joy that made her chest ache for reasons she couldn't have explained. "Ma'am," he said, "this is the best thing I've eaten since before Ruth." He stopped. Something crossed his face. "Since a good while," he said quietly. The table went quiet in a specific way. Not uncomfortable, more like the silence of people holding something carefully. "Ruth was a good cook," Clara said. She said it simply without performing anything. "I've heard she was a good woman altogether. I'm not here to replace her. I know nobody could." She paused. "I'm just here to make sure you eat properly. That's all. That's the job." Hector Reyes, who had said nothing. The entire meal looked up from his stew and met her eyes and gave her the smallest nod she had ever seen a person give, and somehow it communicated more than a speech would have. Ethan Walker was at the far end of the table. He had not said anything either, but she caught him watching her, the same gray-blue eyes in the lamplight now, and whatever was in them, she thought again was the same thing she had seen that afternoon. That quality of even attention, of looking at something and actually seeing it. After dinner, when the men had gone, and she was washing the dishes alone in the kitchen, she heard a footstep in the doorway and looked up. Ethan Walker was standing there with 2 of the dirty pans she hadn't gotten to yet. "I'll dry," he said. Clara looked at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. He moved to the basin beside her, took the first clean pan from her hands, and began to dry it. "Biscuits were good," he said. "They'll be better when I'm more familiar with this stove," Clara said. "That's probably true of most things," Ethan said. They worked in silence for a while. Through the kitchen window, the Montana sky was turning colors she didn't have names for yet. Deep orange and rose and something between blue and purple that pressed down on the hills. And it was genuinely beautiful, and she was genuinely too tired to feel all of what she probably should have felt looking at it. "Tom Briggs," she said. "He doesn't trust me yet." "No," Ethan agreed. "Will he?" Ethan thought about it. "Tom trusted Ruth because she earned it over years," he said. "That's just the kind of man he is. He'll watch you and he'll judge by what he sees, and eventually he'll decide." He paused. "He watched you at dinner tonight. What did he see?" "I imagine he saw someone who mentioned Ruth without making it about herself," Ethan said. "That'll mean something to him." Clara handed him another pot. "Billy Mack," she said. "He's young for this work. His mother's sick back home in Kansas. He sends half his wages every month. He's saving the other half to bring her out here when there's enough." Ethan set down the pot and picked up a cup. "He doesn't know I know that. Tom told me in confidence. I mention it only so you understand something of what I'm dealing with," Clara finished. "Thank you." "The men all have things," Ethan said simply. "Things that explain them. I figured you should know them so you don't mistake their ways for rudeness when it's not." Clara washed another cup and handed it across. "Do you have things?" she asked. She hadn't planned to ask that. It came out from somewhere honest and unexpected. Ethan Walker was quiet for a moment. He dried the cup slowly, looking at it rather than at her. "Probably," he said. "More than I've sorted out." "That's a fair answer," Clara said. They finished the dishes. The sky outside the window had gone dark. Clara dried her hands, folded the cloth, and thought about the boarding house on Milner Street, and the return ticket in her bag, and the life that was waiting for her in Boston, that wasn't really a life at all. "I should get settled," she said. "Is there anything I need to know about the house doors that stick things to avoid?" "Front step's loose," Ethan said. "I keep meaning to fix it. Mind it in the dark." He paused. "The room at the top of the stairs on the right was Ruth's. It's got the best window." He hesitated for just a moment. She noticed it, the small pause, the way it sounded like something he was deciding to say. "I thought you should have it." Clara looked at him. "The men might find that strange," she said carefully. "If they knew Ruth's room was given to a stranger." "I don't think they will," he said. "But I'll tell Tom first if you'd like. He can manage any feelings about it." Clara nodded. "That would be fine." She took her suitcase upstairs. The room at the top of the stairs on the right had a bed and a washstand and a window that faced west. And even in the dark, she could tell that in the morning it would face the mountains, whatever mountains those were that she'd seen from the road, and that if she stood here every morning while the light changed, she might eventually learn their names and feel something like belonging to them. She sat on the edge of the bed and set her Bible on the washstand and looked at her hands in her lap again. They were still soft. Still the hands Nathan Cole had looked at and found wanting. She turned them over. She thought about what Ethan Walker had said on the platform, the way you stood there, like you were deciding what to do next. She thought about her mother, 19 years old, crossing an ocean. Her mother had crossed an ocean. Clara had only crossed half a country. She lay back on Ruth Hadley's bed, in Ruth Hadley's room, looking at the ceiling of the Walker Ranch in Silver Creek, Montana, on a Tuesday evening in July, 1884. And she thought, "I am not what Nathan Cole expected." And then more quietly, like a thing she wasn't quite ready to say out loud, but was trying on for size, "But I might be exactly what this place needs." She was asleep before she finished the thought. Downstairs, Ethan Walker sat at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time, looking at the clean dishes drying on the rack beside the basin. The kitchen smelled of stew and coffee and biscuits, and it smelled in some way he didn't know how to name, like a place where people lived instead of just worked. He had not planned to step forward on that platform today. He had gone into town for feed supplies, and the train arriving had been coincidence, and he had stayed to watch only because a crowd had formed, and curiosity is a human instinct, even in men who have trained themselves to keep it quiet. He had watched Nathan Cole hand that envelope to Clara Whitmore, and he had seen her face in the moment after, and he had recognized something in it with a clarity that surprised him. The particular set of a jaw when a person has decided that what is happening to them will not define them. He had worn that expression himself years ago in different circumstances, and he remembered what it cost to hold it. He had stepped forward because he had a practical need. He told himself that. He told himself that repeatedly on the road home, at the dinner table, at the dish basin. He wasn't sure he entirely believed it. He turned off the lamp and went upstairs to bed, and as he passed the door of Ruth's room, Clara's room now, he heard nothing, which meant she was already asleep, and he thought that was probably the right thing. She'd had a very long day. They both had. He went to his own room and lay in the dark for a while. Through the window, the Montana stars were doing what they always did out here, which was refuse to be modest about their number. He had lived under this sky his whole life, and it still made something in him go quiet in a way nothing else did. He thought about gray-blue eyes that held their ground on a platform and soft hands that were going to be rougher by the end of 3 months, whether she planned for it or not, and a woman who mentioned Ruth Hadley without making it about herself, and a voice that asked, "Do you have things from somewhere honest and unexpected?" He thought about all of that for a while. Then he closed his eyes. Tomorrow was going to start early, and there was cattle work to do, and he needed his sleep. He was asleep within minutes, which was something he hadn't managed in 6 weeks. The first morning at the Walker Ranch, Clara was awake before anyone else. Not because she slept badly, she slept deeply. The kind of sleep that comes after a body has been pushed past its limit and simply quits arguing. But she woke at 4:30 out of habit, the same way she had woken every morning for the 2 years she'd managed her parents' household alone, when there was medicine to prepare and a stove to start before her father got cold. She lay still for a moment in Ruth Hadley's bed in Ruth Hadley's room and let herself feel exactly where she was. Montana. July. A ranch owned by a man she had known for less than a day. 5 men who had eaten her stew the night before, with the careful appreciation of people who had been hungry a long time and weren't entirely sure the food was going to keep coming. She got up dressed and went downstairs. The kitchen was as she had left it, clean organized, the stove banked low but not dead. She built it back up, put water on, and began to figure out breakfast. She was standing at the stove when Tom Briggs walked in at 5 o'clock. He stopped when he saw her. She had the distinct impression he had expected the kitchen to be empty and that her presence in it at this hour represented some kind of early point scored in a game neither of them had formally agreed to play. "Morning," Clara said. "Ma'am?" He crossed to the coffee pot she'd already set out and poured himself a cup, then stood against the far wall and drank it. Clara cracked eggs into the skillet and didn't say anything else. She had learned from her mother that silence is not the same as distance, and that some people need to arrive at conversation in their own time without being pulled. After a while, Tom said, "You're up early." "I usually am," Clara said. "Ruth was up at 4:30 every morning," he said. Then he stopped as if he hadn't meant to say it. "That sounds about right," Clara said. She didn't look up from the stove. "For a household this size, you need that head start." Another silence. Then, "She used to say exactly that." Clara slid the eggs onto a plate and set it on the table in front of him without comment. Tom Briggs looked at the plate, then at her, and then he sat down and ate, and that was the beginning of something, though neither of them would have called it that yet. By the end of the first week, Clara had learned the ranch's rhythms the way you learn a person, by paying attention to what they needed without being asked. The men came in for breakfast at 5:30, which meant the stove had to be ready by 5. They came in for the midday meal at noon if they were working close, and sometimes not at all if they weren't, which meant she had to have something they could carry. They came in for supper at 6, which was the meal that mattered most, the one where they sat down together and were briefly not just workers, but people. She learned their names quickly, and their natures faster. Tom Briggs ate slowly and said little, and noticed everything. Hector Reyes could communicate volumes with a look, and she was discovering a dry sense of humor that appeared without warning and was extremely funny if you were paying attention. The Donnelly brothers argued about everything with the practiced ease of people who have been arguing their whole lives, and consider it a form of affection. Billy Mack was 19 and hungry in all the ways that 19-year-olds are hungry for food, for approval, for someone to believe he was as capable as he wanted to be. And Ethan Walker moved through his own ranch like a man who had learned to take up only the space he needed, which she was beginning to understand was more unusual than it appeared. The first real test came on day 9. Clara had reorganized the supply stores, which was necessary, because whoever had been managing them in the 6 weeks since Ruth's death had been working on a system of pure improvisation. The problem was that she had moved things without telling anyone, and Pete Donnelly spent 20 minutes on a Wednesday morning looking for the salt before he finally came to find her. He was not pleased. "I've been getting the salt from that shelf on the left for 4 years, he said, standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. He was a stocky man, Pete Donnelly, with a red face that went redder when he was irritated. "Left shelf second from the top, same place it's always been. Now it's not there." "It's on the right," Clara said. "Third shelf, next to the pepper and the dried herbs." "Why?" Clara set down what she was doing and turned to face him. She had expected this. Not Pete specifically, but someone, and she had decided in advance that this moment mattered. Not because of the salt, but because of everything the salt stood for. "Because the left shelf gets the damp from the wall in wet weather," she said. "Salt draws moisture and then clumps, and you end up with half of it wasted. The right side stays dry. You'll have better salt in 3 months than you've had in years." Pete Donnelly looked at her. His arms were still crossed. Ruth kept it on the left. Ruth may not have known about the damp yet, Clara said carefully. Or she may have had a different system that worked for her. I'm not criticizing Ruth. I'm trying to get this kitchen running as well as I can, and this is how I know to do it. Pete's jaw worked for a moment. She could see him deciding something. If the salt's worse in 3 months than it is now, he said finally, I'm moving it back. That seems fair, Clara said. He uncrossed his arms. He didn't smile, but something in his face settled. He went and got the salt from the right shelf, 3rd row, and he didn't say anything else. And that evening at supper, he passed the salt to Billy Mack across the table, and Clara noticed that he did it without looking like a man who had any feelings about salt at all. Small victories. She collected them like the pennies in her envelope. The second test was harder. It came on day 14, and it didn't come from the ranch hands. She was in the kitchen mid-morning when she heard horses in the yard, and then voices Ethan's, and a man she didn't recognize speaking in the tone that men use when they want to sound casual and are not. She wasn't listening deliberately, but the kitchen window was open because the July heat was punishing and voices carry. Can't keep going the way you have been, Ethan, the unfamiliar voice was saying. The note on the north pasture land is due in the fall. You know that. I know it, James. The cattle numbers are down 20% from where they need to be to cover it. You know that too. I know that as well. So what's your plan? A pause. I'm working on a plan. Because Daniel's plan is not an option, Ethan said, and something in his voice had gone very flat and very quiet in a way she hadn't heard from him before. He's your brother, the man called James said. I'm aware of who he is. He's offering a fair price for the north section. If you sold that parcel and cleared the note, you'd have breathing room to... The north section has the best water on this ranch, Ethan said. If I sell it, I lose the water. If I lose the water, I lose the cattle. If I lose the cattle, I might as well sell everything. Another pause. I am not selling to Daniel's company, James. Tell him I said so. Clara moved away from the window. She had not meant to hear any of that, but she had heard it, and the information settled into her chest, with a particular weight, the kind that comes when you understand that the place you are standing in is less stable than it appeared. She thought about it all afternoon, and she didn't mention it to anyone. That evening, after supper, she was in the kitchen again. She seemed to spend most of her life in the kitchen, which she didn't mind, because the kitchen was where she had the most information about the actual state of things. When Billy Mack came in looking for something sweet, which was a habit of his, she had started accommodating by keeping dried apple rings in the larder. Billy, she said, as she handed them over. Who's Daniel? Billy Mack's hand froze halfway to his mouth with an apple ring. He looked at her sideways. Where'd you hear that name? Around, Clara said simply. Billy chewed and swallowed and looked out the window the way people do when they're deciding how much to say. Ethan's brother, he said finally. Younger brother. He went to Denver a couple years back, got mixed up with some land development company, the kind that buys up rangeland and breaks it into pieces for farming operations. He paused. He came back here last spring wanting Ethan to sell the north section. Ethan said no. Daniel didn't take it well. They don't get along. They used to, Billy said, in the way that someone says something that used to be true about the world and is still getting used to it not being true anymore. Daniel used to work this ranch same as anyone. Then he went to Denver and came back different. He shrugged. The way Ethan tells it, and he doesn't tell it much, Daniel thinks the cattle business is finished out here. Thinks the future is farming operations and development. He might not be wrong. I don't know. But he wants Ethan's land to do it with. And Ethan's land is the only thing standing between most of these men and having nowhere to go. Billy ate another apple ring and looked at her with 19-year-old directness. Why are you asking? Curiosity, Clara said. Uh-huh, Billy said in a tone that indicated he was 19, not stupid. He pocketed the rest of the apple rings and went back out, and Clara stood at the basin and thought about water rights and north pastures and a banknote coming due in the fall. That night she took out a piece of paper from her traveling case and did some arithmetic by lamplight. She had been paid at the end of her first week. Ethan had laid the money on the kitchen table without ceremony, which she appreciated. She counted it against what she'd calculated she needed over 3 months to have enough to begin figuring out her next step. The arithmetic was tight, but possible if she was careful. She looked at the numbers for a while. Then she put the paper away and told herself it was none of her business. She almost believed it. The third test and the worst one of the first month came from outside the ranch entirely. Clara had gone into Silver Creek on a Thursday with Tom Briggs, who made a supply run every other week. Ethan had suggested she come along as the household supplies were now her responsibility, and she would have a better sense of what was needed. Tom had not objected, which was, she was learning as close to enthusiasm as Tom Briggs got about most things. The general store in Silver Creek was run by a woman named Margaret Fuller, who was perhaps 55, with sharp eyes and a measuring quality that Clara recognized as intelligence applied efficiently in a small space. Margaret Fuller did not appear unfriendly. She also did not appear to be the kind of woman who left things unexamined. "You're the woman Ethan Walker hired," Margaret said while she was pulling supplies from shelves. It wasn't a question. "Clara Whitmore," Clara said. "Yes, mail order bride that Nathan Cole sent back." Clara kept her expression even. "That's one way to describe it." "What's another way?" "A woman who made alternate arrangements quickly," Clara said. Something flickered in Margaret Fuller's eyes, possibly amusement. "People talk," she said. "I've been told that's what happens in a town this size. What they say is that Ethan Walker's a fool for taking on a city woman with soft hands who doesn't know a lick about frontier life." Margaret Fuller set a bag of flour on the counter. "What I say is that Ethan Walker hasn't made a foolish decision since I've known him, which is 20 years, so I'm inclined to wait and see." "That seems reasonable," Clara said. Margaret studied her for a moment. "You're not what I expected either," she said, "for whatever that's worth." "What did you expect?" "Tears," Margaret said bluntly. "Most women in your position would have been crying all over town by now. About Nathan Cole, about their situation, about how far from home they are." She paused. "You haven't cried in public once." "I cry in private like anyone else," Clara said. "I just don't see what good it does an audience." Margaret Fuller looked at her for a long moment. Then she added an extra pound of sugar to the order without commenting on it, and that Clara thought was the closest thing to a vote of confidence she was likely to get from that quarter, and she took it. But the harder moment came when they were loading the wagon. Nathan Cole appeared. He came around the corner of the mercantile and stopped when he saw her, and she saw the moment his face rearranged itself, surprise. First, then something more complicated. She was holding one end of a flour sack, and Tom Briggs was holding the other end, and she didn't put it down. "Miss Whitmore," Nathan Cole said. "Mr. Cole," Clara said. He looked at her and the work dress she'd changed into more practical than the navy wool disaster, and the flour sack in her hands, and Tom Briggs watching the whole exchange with the expression of a man keeping a detailed internal record. "I heard you'd taken a position with Walker's Ranch," Nathan said. "I have," Clara said. "How are you finding it?" "Fine," Clara said. "It's fine work." There was a pause. Nathan Cole had the look of a man who wants to say something and is having difficulty finding the right form for it. "I want you to know," he said, "that what happened at the station, I made the decision I thought was best at the time." "I understand that," Clara said. "I hope you don't think poorly of me." Clara looked at him. She thought about the envelope. She thought about 90 seconds of conversation and a judgment made on the platform in front of half the town. She thought about the sewing machine and the writing desk and 3 days on a train. "Mr. Cole," she said, "I don't think poorly of you. I think you made a quick judgment based on incomplete information, which is something people do. I've moved on." She picked up her end of the flour sack. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She and Tom lifted the sack into the wagon. When she looked up, Nathan Cole was walking away, and Tom Briggs was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Something had shifted in those November Creek eyes, shifted considerably. "You could have let him have it," Tom said quietly. I know, Clara said. Most people would have. Most people are angrier than I am, Clara said. I've been too busy to stay angry. Tom Briggs was quiet for a moment. Then he said in the tone of a man making a simple observation about the weather, Ruth used to say something like that. Clara didn't answer, because her throat had done something complicated, and she was not going to cry in public in Silver Creek, Montana. Not today. Not in front of Tom Briggs, who was just beginning to trust her. So she smoothed her dress and climbed up onto the wagon seat and looked at the road north, the road back to the ranch, and waited for Tom to climb up beside her. He did, and they drove back in silence, and it was the most comfortable silence she had shared with him yet. The weeks that followed moved fast the way time moves when you are working hard enough that the days have shape and purpose. Clara settled into the ranch the way water settles into a space, finding the available room filling it, without forcing taking the shape of the container while maintaining her own nature. She learned the stove's particular tempers. She learned which of the men needed quiet in the morning and which needed talking. She learned that Hector Reyes's horse had a leg problem that was being managed, but worrying everyone who knew about it, and that this worry was the reason Hector sometimes stood at the barn door in the evenings looking out with an expression nobody interrupted. She learned that Sam Donnelly had been writing letters to a woman in Nebraska for 6 months, and was too proud to ask anyone whether the letters were any good, so she started leaving his clean laundry near the writing desk in the bunkhouse, where she could see it had papers and ink on it, and she said nothing, and waited. And eventually one evening, he left a folded letter on the kitchen table, with a look on his face that a man has when he is doing something that costs him something. She read it, and corrected the spelling quietly, and left it back on the table folded the same way, and Sam picked it up the next morning without a word, and she never told anyone. What she and Ethan were building happened so gradually that neither of them could have pointed to a single moment and said there, that's when it started. It was the accumulated weight of small things. The coffee she started leaving on the stove at the time she'd noticed he came in from the early morning check of the cattle. The way he started leaving wood stacked beside the kitchen door without being asked, because he'd noticed she was carrying it too far. The evenings when the men had gone to the bunkhouse and they sat at the kitchen table and talked about the ranch, about the day, about nothing in particular, and the conversation ran on longer than it needed to because neither of them was quite ready to say goodnight. You know everyone's business by now, Ethan said one evening. It was not an accusation. It was said with something close to admiration. I pay attention, Clara said. Sam's letter, he said. He told Tom you helped him with it. Clara shrugged. I corrected some spelling. Sam Donnelly doesn't show his letters to anyone, Ethan said. He barely lets people see his face when he's feeling something. He showed you his letters inside of 3 weeks. He didn't show me, Clara said. He left it on the table. Those are different things. Ethan smiled. She had seen it before, that contained smile, the shape of a thing held carefully, but it still did something to the air in the room when it appeared. That's a distinction he probably appreciates, he said. People need to keep their dignity, Clara said, especially when they're asking for help. The trick is to make the help look like it happened by accident. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Where'd you learn that? My mother, Clara said. She had a way of helping people that never made them feel small for needing it. I've been trying to learn it my whole life. You're doing all right, Ethan said. Clara looked at her coffee. Tell me about Daniel, she said. She had been waiting for the right moment to say it, and she wasn't sure this was it, but she'd been waiting long enough that she'd decided to stop waiting. Ethan's hands went still on his cup. Something changed in his face, not closing exactly, but the way a door changes when someone puts a hand on the latch ready to go either way. What do you know about Daniel? He said. That he wants the north section, that a company in Denver is involved, that there's a note coming due in the fall, and the cattle numbers aren't where they need to be. She paused. I wasn't eavesdropping deliberately. The kitchen window was open. I heard enough to be concerned. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. She could hear the ranch house settling around them, the particular sounds of a building at rest. It's nothing you need to worry about, he said finally. Ethan? Clara. She looked at him directly. "I work for this ranch," she said. "The men who eat at this table work for this ranch. If the ranch is in trouble, that's not nothing to me." Something moved in his face, the latch hand deciding. "The note on the north pasture land comes due in November," he said. "I took it out 3 years ago to buy additional breeding stock. The cattle were supposed to cover it by now, but we lost a bad stretch last winter storms, then disease. I lost almost 30 head in January alone. The numbers haven't recovered the way I'd hoped." He looked at the table. "Daniel knows all of this, because our mother told him, and Daniel came back here 6 months ago with an offer from his company to buy the north section at fair market value. He says it's the practical solution. But you won't take it. The north section has the only reliable water source on this property," he said. "Without it, I can't run the cattle operation I need to run to make the rest of the land worth anything. Daniel knows that. His company knows that. They want that water source." He paused. "If I sell it to them, I'm not saving the ranch. I'm just choosing how I lose it." "What happens to the men?" Clara asked. He looked at her. "What? If you lose the ranch, what happens to Tom and Hector and the Donnellys and Billy?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "They'd find positions elsewhere, eventually." "Billy's sending money home to a sick mother," Clara said. "Hector's been here 10 years, and he's not young anymore. Tom Briggs has built his whole life around this place." She paused. "I'm not saying that to make you feel worse. I'm saying it because I think you already know it, and I think it's part of why you're not sleeping." Ethan looked at her sharply. "What makes you think I'm not sleeping?" "You've had dark circles under your eyes for 2 weeks, and you've been coming in from the cattle check earlier and earlier in the morning, which means you're getting up earlier and earlier, which means you're lying awake." She said it plainly. "I notice things. You know this about me by now." He was quiet. The tightness in his jaw was still there, but something else was there too. The look of a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been asked about it by someone who actually wanted to know the answer. "It's a problem I don't have a clean solution to," he said. "Not yet." "Are you looking for one?" "Every day." "Good," Clara said. She stood up, collected their cups, and took them to the basin. "Then keep looking. You'll find it, or you'll find something close enough to it." She rinsed the cups without turning around. "And in the meantime, the men eat well, and the house runs proper, and whatever else happens, they'll know someone was paying attention to them. That matters more than you might think when everything else is uncertain." She heard him push his chair back from the table. She heard him stand. "Clara," he said. She turned. He was standing at the table with his hat in his hands, the same gesture as the platform, that same slow turning of the brim, and his face had the expression she had been learning to read over these weeks, the one that meant he was going to say something real. "I'm glad you didn't get on Thursday's train," he said. Clara looked at him for a moment. "So am I," she said. He nodded once the way he did, and went upstairs to bed, and she stood at the basin in the dark kitchen and allowed herself for just a moment to feel the full weight of where she was. 4 weeks ago, she had stepped off a train into the worst moment of her adult life. And she was standing here now in this kitchen that had started to feel like her kitchen in this house, that had started to feel like her house in this life, that had started to feel dangerously cautiously against every careful instinct she had, like it might be on its way to becoming her life. She was not naive enough to call it love. She had been on this ranch 28 days. She had been handed a return ticket on day 1, and the memory of that envelope was still in her bag, still real, still the reminder that she had come here because she had nowhere else to go, and that she never wanted her reasons for being somewhere to be that simple again. But it was something. It was building towards something, and she was either going to have to handle that with great care, or figure out how to stop noticing it, and she was increasingly sure that the second option was not available to her. She dried the cups and put them away and went upstairs. Down the hall, she heard nothing from behind Ethan's door, which meant either he was asleep or he was lying awake in the dark, the way she was probably going to lie awake. And she thought about that for a moment before she very firmly told herself to stop thinking about it and go to sleep. It was the 4th week that Daniel Walker came to the ranch. Clara was in the side yard hanging laundry when she heard the horse, and she heard Ethan come out of the barn, and she didn't look up from the sheet she was pinning, because whatever was about to happen was not her business. But she listened. She couldn't help it. "Daniel," Ethan said. His voice had that flat, contained quality she'd heard through the kitchen window that first day. "Brother." The voice was younger, smoother, with a different quality to it, polished in a way that Ethan's was not. A city voice laid over a ranch voice the way a coat of paint changes something without changing what it's made of. "I heard you'd hired a housekeeper." "I did. The mail-order woman from Nathan's situation." "Her name is Clara Whitmore," Ethan said. "And that's not what she is." A small pause. "I've got a revised offer from the company," Daniel said. "They've come up by 8%. It's a fair number, Ethan. You could pay the note and have operating capital left over and—" "No," Ethan said. "You haven't heard the number." "It doesn't matter what the number is," Ethan said. "I've told you what selling the north section does to this ranch. I've told you twice. And I've told you that holding on to the north section while the note goes unpaid does worse." Daniel's voice had an edge in it now. "You're going to lose everything trying to save everything. That's not stubbornness, Ethan, that's pride, and there's a difference." "Come inside," Ethan said. "We'll talk inside." Clara didn't hear what came next because they moved away from the yard, but she stood with the wet sheet in her hands for a long moment. And she thought about water rights and banknotes and a younger brother with a city voice and a company that wanted the one thing the ranch couldn't survive giving up. And she thought about her father's business partner in Boston, the one who had written her a brief formal letter 6 months ago, saying that her parents had made some provisions, a small investment her father had tucked away years ago, that her mother had never touched, and that Clara had not yet decided what to do with. She pinned the sheet. She thought about that letter for a very long time. By evening, Daniel Walker was gone. She could tell from the quality of Ethan's movements at the supper table, the tight set of his jaw, the way he ate without tasting, that it had not gone well, or rather that it had gone exactly as he'd expected, which was not the same as well. The men felt it too. Tom Briggs kept his eyes on his plate. The Donnellys didn't argue once, which was the most alarming indicator. Billy Mack ate fast and found reasons to leave the table early. Hector refilled everyone's coffee twice without being asked which was his way of caring for people when he couldn't find words for it. Clara let the meal pass without comment. She kept the food coming and the coffee hot, and she made sure everyone felt the table was a steady place, even when everything around it wasn't. After the men had cleared out and the dishes were done, she sat down at the table with the household account book she'd been keeping a record of supplies expenditures, what was needed, what was wasted, what could be saved, and she set it open in front of Ethan's empty chair. She didn't say anything. She just left it there. And when Ethan came back into the kitchen an hour later, having walked outside in the dark the way men do when they're working something through, he stopped and looked at the account book and then at Clara. "What's this?" he said. "Everything I've managed to reduce in household expenditure over the past 4 weeks," she said, "without cutting the men's meals or the quality of what they're eating. It's not much against a banknote, but I thought you should see it." She paused. "I also think the hay storage system is costing you more than it needs to. Tom could tell you better than I can, but I've been watching the quantities, and I think there's waste in the way it's being used." Ethan sat down slowly. He looked at the numbers. He looked at them for a long time. "You've been tracking this for 4 weeks, he said. "It's my job to manage the household efficiently," Clara said. "This is part of it. This goes further than anyone asked you to go." "I know." He looked up at her. "Why?" Clara met his eyes. She had an answer ready, the professional one, the practical one, the one about it being her job, and the ranch being her workplace and efficiency being something she believed in. She had that answer completely prepared. What came out instead was the honest one. "Because those men at that table deserve to still be sitting at that table in November," she said. "Because Tom Briggs has given 20 years of his life to this land, and Billy Mack has a mother in Kansas who is counting on his wages, and Hector hasn't got anywhere else to go, and the Donnelly brothers would be lost without each other and without this place." She stopped. And because you stepped forward on a train platform when you didn't have to, and I've been trying to figure out how to repay that ever since." Ethan Walker looked at her across the kitchen table in the lamplight, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the ranch house settled and creaked around them in the summer heat, and somewhere outside, something made a sound in the dark. "Clara," he said. His voice was different from any version of it she'd heard before, quieter, with something unguarded in it. "You don't owe me anything for that." "I know I don't," she said. "That's not what I said." He looked at her. She looked back. Outside, the Montana stars were doing what they always did, and the men were in the bunkhouse, and the cattle were on the north pasture with its reliable water, and the banknote was still due in November, and none of that had changed. But something in the kitchen had shifted the way air shifts before weather comes, and they both felt it, and neither of them reached for it yet. And that restraint was its own kind of understanding between two people who had both been hurt by moving too fast toward things they needed. Clara closed the account book and stood up. "Good night, Ethan," she said. "Good night, Clara," he said. She went upstairs. He stayed at the table with the account book and the lamplight and looked at her handwriting in the columns. Careful, precise, nothing wasted for a long time after she was gone. Daniel Walker came back 3 days later, and this time he didn't come alone. Clara heard the horses, first two of them moving fast up the north road, and she was at the kitchen window before she had made a conscious decision to move. Ethan was already coming out of the barn wiping his hands on a rag, and Tom Briggs had appeared from somewhere near the fence line, with the particular alertness of a man who has learned to read approaching trouble by the sound of it. Daniel was on the first horse. The second man Clara didn't recognize, city clothes, a jacket that had no business being worn in a Montana July, carrying a leather satchel, the way lawyers carry leather satchels, which is to say, like it contains something they intend to use. "That's James Alcott," Billy Mack said quietly from behind her. She hadn't heard him come into the kitchen. He was looking past her shoulder at the yard. "He's a land agent. Works out of Helena. Handles acquisitions for the big development companies." He paused. "Daniel's brought the paperwork." Clara turned and looked at Billy. "How do you know that?" "Because Alcott was here last spring when Daniel made his first offer," Billy said. "He had the same satchel." He looked at her, and his 19-year-old face was carrying something older than his years. Ethan turned him away then too. But the note was further out then. "It's closer now." Clara looked back at the yard. Ethan had stopped walking. He stood with his arms at his sides, and from the back, which was all she could see, he looked like a man bracing for impact. "Go back to the bunkhouse," she told Billy. "Clara, please," she said. "Let Ethan handle this." Billy went but slowly, and she could tell from the way he looked back twice that he wasn't going far. She stayed at the window. She told herself she was staying because it was her kitchen, and she wasn't going anywhere, which was true, and not because every instinct she had was pointing her at that yard like a compass needle finding north, which was also true. Daniel was talking. She couldn't hear the words from this distance, but she could read the shape of them, the particular forward lean of a man making an argument. He's rehearsed the way the land agent Alcott opened his satchel at precisely the right moment, the papers appearing like props in a play that had been staged carefully. Ethan stood straight and didn't take the papers and didn't move. Tom Briggs moved. He walked from the fence line to a point about 10 feet behind Ethan and stopped there, and he crossed his arms and he didn't say anything. He just stood there clearly and deliberately in a position that communicated everything without requiring a word. Clara felt something tighten in her chest at the sight of it. Ethan said something. Daniel said something back. The land agent held the papers up. Then Ethan turned around and walked back to the barn, just like that. No argument, no raised voice, no dramatic conclusion. He simply turned his back on them and walked away. And after a moment, Daniel said something to Alcott, and Alcott put the papers back in the satchel, and they both got on their horses and rode south. Tom Briggs stayed where he was until the horses were gone. Then he looked at the barn where Ethan had disappeared, and then at the kitchen window where Clara was standing, and he gave her the smallest nod she'd seen since Hector Reyes's first night at her table. She nodded back. 20 minutes later, Ethan came into the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee and stood at the basin drinking it with his back to her, and she didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, and after a while, he said without turning around, "The note comes due in 9 weeks." "I know," Clara said. "I don't have the number to cover it. Not yet." "I know that too." He turned around. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The deeper kind of tired, the kind that comes from carrying something alone that was meant to be carried by more than one person. "Daniel's company will buy the note from the bank if I don't pay," he said. "Alcott explained it to me very carefully today. They've already spoken to the bank. If the note transfers to them, they can attach the north section as collateral, and I'll have no legal ground to refuse the sale." Clara set down the knife she'd been using and turned to face him fully. "Can they do that? Is it legal?" "Alcott says it is." He said it with the flatness of a man who has already checked and doesn't like the answer. "The bank holds the note. If they sell it to another party, that party has the same rights. Daniel knew about the note before he came back here. He's been planning this since spring." The room was quiet for a moment. "Your own brother," Clara said. Ethan didn't answer that. The non-answer was its own answer. "What does he get out of it?" she asked. "If his company gets the north section." "Water," Ethan said. "There's a farming operation planned for the valley east of here. 300 acres, maybe more, if they can secure the water rights. The north section's water source feeds that valley." He set his cup down. "They're not buying a piece of my ranch. They're buying what makes 30 square miles of land viable. I'm just the person standing in the way of it." Clara looked at him. She thought about the letter in her traveling case upstairs, the one from her father's business partner, the one she had read twice and then put away because she hadn't decided what to do with it, and then had read again last week and thought about for 3 days, and then had thought about again when Ethan came in from the dark after Daniel's first visit with the account book open in front of him. She had been waiting to say what she was about to say until she was sure. She was sure. "How much is the note?" she asked. Ethan looked at her. A long pause. "Clara, how much?" He told her. She thought about the letter. She thought about the number in it. She did the arithmetic quickly in her head the same way she had done it twice before, once in her room by lamplight, once at the kitchen table while the men were at breakfast. "I need to write a letter," she said. "Tonight. Can Tom take it to the telegraph office in Silver Creek tomorrow morning?" Ethan's eyes had gone very still. "What kind of letter?" "My father had a business partner in Boston," she said. "A man named Arthur Whitfield. Before my father died, he set aside a small amount in investment, not much, but he'd been careful with it for years." She paused. "Mr. Whitfield wrote to me 6 months ago to tell me it was there and ask what I wanted to do with it. I hadn't decided." She looked at Ethan directly. "I've decided." The silence in the kitchen was complete. "No," Ethan said. His voice was quiet, but it had an edge in it she hadn't heard before. "Absolutely not." "Ethan." "Clara, no." He pushed away from the basin and faced her fully, and the tiredness in his face had been replaced by something urgent. "You came out here with nothing. You worked 4 weeks for fair wages to build something for yourself. Whatever your father left you is yours. I am not taking that." "I'm not offering to give it to you," Clara said. "I'm offering to invest it." "That's not a distinction I can accept. It's one I'm insisting on." She kept her voice level. "I've been keeping the household accounts for 4 weeks. I know what this ranch can do. The cattle operation is sound. The losses last winter were weather, not management, and the herd is recovering. With the note cleared, you'd have room to rebuild the numbers by spring. By next fall, the operation could carry its own weight and return a fair profit to anyone who held an investment stake in it." She paused. "I've done the arithmetic. It works. You've been planning this." "I've been thinking about it," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him doing what he did, that careful internal accounting, weighing things on the scales that lived behind his gray-blue eyes. "Why?" he said. "Give me the real reason." Clara took a breath. Because your brother is trying to take something from you by using your loyalty to this land against you, she said. And because the men at that table don't deserve to lose their home because a land company in Denver decided they wanted what's under your north pasture. And because... She stopped. She had been going to say the third thing, but the third thing was closer to the inside of her chest than she had intended, and she pulled back from it. Those are enough reasons, she said. Ethan was quiet. He looked at the floor, then at the window, then at her. If this goes wrong, he said slowly, if the cattle don't recover, if the market drops, if anything, then I lose a portion of a small inheritance, Clara said. That's a risk I'm willing to take. I'm not, he said. I'm not willing to let you take that risk. That is not your decision to make. The words landed between them, and neither of them moved. Then Tom Briggs opened the kitchen door from outside and stopped when he saw their faces. He looked at Ethan and he looked at Clara, and he did the extremely rapid calculation of a man who can read a room. I'll come back, he said. Tom, Clara said. How long have you been with this ranch? Tom Briggs blinked. 21 years come October. And in 21 years has this land ever failed to produce when it was managed right? A pause. No, Tom said carefully, when it's managed right. And is it being managed right? Tom looked at Ethan. Something passed between them, the look of two men who have known each other long enough that a look contains a conversation. Then Tom looked back at Clara. Yes, he said. Better than it's been in a while, truth be told. Thank you, Clara said. She looked at Ethan. Write the letter with me tonight, both of us. Terms we both agree to on paper, legal and clear, not a gift, not charity. A partnership with defined terms and a reasonable return on investment. She held his gaze. Or don't, and let Daniel's company buy the note in 9 weeks and see what happens to this place. The silence stretched. Tom Briggs, who had the wisdom of 21 years on this land and a very acute sense of when to be present and when to disappear, stepped fully into the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table and said nothing at all. Ethan looked at Tom. Tom studied his coffee. Ethan looked at Clara. Partnership terms, he said finally. On paper, both of us sign. Both of us sign, Clara agreed. They wrote the letter that night, the three of them, because Tom Briggs turned out to have a very useful opinion about what reasonable partnership terms looked like, and a surprisingly firm grasp of ranch finance for a man who claimed he didn't concern himself with numbers. It went to the telegraph office the next morning, carried by Tom himself, because Ethan didn't trust anyone else with it, and Tom understood what was at stake. They waited 5 days for the answer. Those 5 days were some of the most ordinary and some of the most charged days Clara had spent on the ranch. Everything continued as normal on the surface. Meals worked the men coming in from the cattle and going out again, the stove and the basin, and the endless productive rhythm of a working household. But underneath it ran a current, the way a river runs under ice in late winter, felt even when it can't be seen. On the third day, Ethan found her in the yard in the late afternoon, and handed her a cup of coffee and stood beside her without saying anything, and she drank the coffee and they watched the cattle on the north slope together for a while. If Whitfield says no, Ethan said. He won't, Clara said. But if he does, then we find another way, she said. There's always another way. It just sometimes takes longer to see it. He looked at her. How do you do that? Do what? Stay that sure of yourself, he said. I've watched you for 6 weeks. I've watched you walk into a room where nobody wanted you, and turn it into a room where people looked forward to coming. I've watched you take an argument from Pete Donnelly about the location of a salt container, and make him feel good about changing his mind. I've watched you. He stopped. How do you do it? Clara thought about this honestly. I don't feel sure, she said. I just don't let the uncertainty show until I've had a chance to deal with it privately. She paused. My mother used to say that confidence is mostly just deciding to act before your fear catches up with you. Smart woman, your mother. Exceptional woman, Clara said. I've spent my whole life trying to be half of what she was. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about her," he said. And she did. Standing in the yard with cooling coffee cups while the cattle moved on the north slope, and the light changed, and Tom Briggs made 2 deliberate passes across the far field to give them their privacy. Clara told Ethan Walker about her mother, the woman who had crossed an ocean at 19 with nothing, and built a life full of small dignities, who had known every neighbor's name and history, and never once made anyone feel small for needing something, who had died the previous October after 8 months of increasing difficulty, holding Clara's hand and saying, "It's all right, sweetheart. It's all right. You know what to do." Ethan listened the way he did everything completely, without interrupting, with his full attention directed at her in a way that she had never gotten used to, and suspected she never would. "She sounds like Ruth," he said finally. Clara looked at him. "You've said that before. You compared something to Ruth." "Tom said it," he said. "Not me. You said it the night I told you about helping Sam with his letters." She paused. "I think it might be the highest compliment available at this ranch." Something moved in his face. "Probably," he said. "Yeah, probably it is." The telegraph answer came on the 5th day. Tom brought it back from town at a pace that was almost but not quite a run, and he came through the kitchen door and put the paper on the table in front of Clara without a word, and she picked it up and read it, and felt something release in her chest that had been held very tight for a very long time. Arthur Whitfield's answer was yes. The terms were acceptable. The funds would be transferred to the Silver Creek Bank within the week. The note would be covered. The partnership was agreed. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at Tom. Tom Briggs had an expression on his face that she had not seen from him before, open and unheld, and he looked about 10 years younger than usual. "I'll find Ethan," he said. His voice had something rough in it. "He's at the north fence." "Thank you, Tom," Clara said. He went out, and she sat at the kitchen table alone with the telegraph paper, and she allowed herself exactly 1 minute of feeling the full weight of what had just happened. 1 minute of sitting very still with her hands flat on the table and her eyes closed, and the kitchen around her smelling of coffee and wood smoke, and the beginning of something that hadn't been possible until now. Then she got up and started making supper, because the men would be in at 6 and they needed to eat, and some things simply continued regardless of what else was happening. Ethan came in while she was at the stove, and she heard him behind her, and she heard him pick up the telegraph paper from the table, and she heard the silence while he read it. "Clara," he said. "I know," she said. "I don't—" He stopped. She heard him set the paper down. "Thank you," he said. Quiet, simple, nothing performed in it. She turned around. He was standing at the table, and he looked like a man who has just had something very heavy lifted off his shoulders, and isn't quite sure yet how to hold himself without it. "Don't thank me," she said. "It's an investment. I expect a reasonable return." "You'll get it," he said. "I promise you that." "I know I will," she said. "Now sit down. Supper's almost ready." That evening, the whole table felt different. Nobody announced anything Ethan hadn't told the men yet, and Clara didn't think it was her place to. But something in Ethan's posture was different, and people who live in close quarters notice everything. And by the time they were halfway through supper, Billy Mack was grinning without entirely knowing why, and even Tom Briggs was talking more than usual. Hector Reyes refilled everyone's coffee twice and caught Clara's eye from across the table, and gave her that smallest nod of his, and she gave it back. 3 days later, the first real disaster struck. It came without warning at 2 a.m, the sound that woke Clara before she understood what it was. A low, ugly sound that grew and spread and became unmistakable. She was out of bed and at the window before she was fully awake, and what she saw below was a horror. 3 men on horses were moving through the south fence line. They had cut the wire. The cattle were already pushing through the opening, panicked and confused, moving in the wrong direction. One of the riders was driving them deliberately, cutting off the return, moving them south, working with the efficient expertise of people who had done this before. Cattle thieves. She was at the door of Ethan's room in 6 seconds, knocking hard. "Ethan, south fence, now." Then she was down the stairs, and she found Hector Reyes already in the yard. He must have heard something, or some instinct had woken him, and she grabbed his arm and pointed. He said something in Spanish that she suspected was not appropriate for polite company, and sprinted for the barn. She went back into the house. Her heart was slamming in her chest, and her hands were not steady, and she was trying to remember where Ethan kept the rifle she had seen him cleaning at the kitchen table 2 weeks ago. The cabinet in the hall. She went for it, and it was there, and she checked it the way her father had taught her when she was 15, because her father was a Boston man who believed in knowing how to handle things, regardless of whether you expected to need to, and he had been right. She loaded it, and she went back into the hall, and she planted herself between the kitchen and the front door. The men outside were shouting. Horses were moving fast. She heard Ethan's voice and Tom's, and then a shot fired somewhere in the dark, which made her hands clench on the rifle stock, but she did not move from where she stood. Billy Mack came through the back door at a run, and stopped hard when he saw her. "There are men still out there," she said. "2 riders went south with the cattle. I don't know if there's a third one who might come this way." Billy stared at her. "Clara, you can't—" "I am not asking for your opinion on what I can do," she said. "Is there anyone still in the bunkhouse?" "Sam's hurt," Billy said. "Something hit his shoulder when he came out. He's back in the bunkhouse." "Go stay with him," Clara said. "Lock the door." "I should be out there." "The men out there don't need another body in the dark. They need Sam protected," she said. "Go." Billy went. She stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 20 minutes. She could hear things outside, movement voices, the increasingly distant sound of cattle, then closer voices, then nothing for a stretch that made her grip tighten, then Ethan's voice, distinct and clear, saying something she couldn't make out. Then the back door opened, and Tom Briggs came in and stopped when he saw her. They looked at each other. "How many did you lose?" she said. 12 head, Tom said. His voice was controlled, but there was something raw underneath it. "They knew what they were doing. They'd cut the fence before we heard anything. By the time we got out there, they had a head start." He stopped. His eyes went to the rifle in her hands. "You were ready to use that," he said. It wasn't a question. "If someone came through that door who shouldn't have," Clara said. "Yes." Tom looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she wasn't expecting. "I owe you an apology," he said. Clara blinked. "What?" "First week you were here?" he said. "I watched you like I was waiting for you to fall. Waiting for you to show me you were what I expected." He took his hat off and held it in front of him. "I was wrong about what to expect." "Tom," she started. "Let me finish." His voice was rough. "Ruth used to say that the only way to know a person is to watch them when things go wrong, not when things are easy." He paused. "Things just went wrong." He put his hat back on. "You did all right, Clara." She looked at him. Her hands were finally starting to stop shaking now that it was over, now that there was a steady wall standing between her and the adrenaline that had been holding her up for 20 minutes. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He went back out. Ethan came in 5 minutes later. He came through the back door, and he stopped in the hallway, and he looked at her standing there with the rifle in her hands, and his face did something she had never seen it do before. Not surprise. Not relief, though. Both of those were in there somewhere. Something deeper than either of those things. The look of a man who has just seen something that reorganized the way he understood the world. He crossed the hallway in 3 steps and took the rifle from her hands, not pulling it away, but just covering her hands with his for a moment, and she felt the warmth of them and how steady they were, and she was very grateful for that, because hers were starting to shake again now that she wasn't alone. "You stood here," he said. "Someone had to." Billy was with Sam. Sam was hurt. She pulled in a breath. "Is everyone all right? Is anyone else hurt?" "No," he said. "Cuts from the fence wire. Nothing serious." He still had one hand over hers on the rifle stock. "You loaded this yourself." "My father taught me." "Your father," he said softly, "was a practical man." "He was," Clara said. How many did you get back? 6, Ethan said. Tom and Hector got 6 of the 12 back before they crossed the South Ridge. The other 6 are gone. He said it flatly, absorbing the loss the way you absorb a body blow, taking it, registering it, not falling. With the banknote cleared, I can absorb 6 head. I can't replace them fast, but I can absorb them. She nodded. Her hands had almost stopped shaking. He was still there, one hand over hers, and they were both standing in the hallway in the middle of the night, and neither of them had moved. Daniel, she said. Ethan went very still. What? 3 men. They knew your fence line. They knew where the cattle were, how many where they'd push. She looked at him. They came at 2 in the morning when everyone was asleep. That's not a random theft, Ethan. Someone told them how this property runs. The silence was complete. She watched it move across his face. The calculation, the resistance, the thing in him that didn't want to land where the logic was pointing, and then the grim arrival at the place it was pointing anyway. He wouldn't, Ethan said. But the words didn't have conviction in them. They had the sound of a hope, not a belief. He came here twice with a land agent trying to get your north section, Clara said carefully. The second time he had paperwork and a plan for the banknote. You've refused him twice. He is not out of options yet. She paused. I'm not saying I know. I'm saying it fits. Ethan let go of her hands. He stepped back. He put the rifle against the wall and stood there looking at nothing she could see, and the look on his face was the hardest thing she had watched him carry yet, because this was not just the weight of a failing ranch or a dangerous debt. This was a brother. I have to be sure, he said finally. Yes, Clara said. You do. If I'm wrong. You have to be sure first, she said again. Before you do anything, find out. He looked at her. How? Send Tom to Silver Creek tomorrow, not for supplies, to talk. She paused. People know things in that town. Margaret Fuller knows things. Somebody saw those men before tonight, and somebody knows where they came from. She met his eyes. Find out who sent them. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened, and the particular quality of his stillness changed from carrying to deciding. Something resolved in him the way weather resolves the uncertainty going one direction. I'll send Tom first thing, he said. Good, Clara said. She reached past him and picked up the rifle. She unloaded it with the same practiced movements she'd used loading it because her father had been clear that how you handled a weapon when the emergency was over was as important as how you handled it during, and she set it safely back in the cabinet in the hall. Then she turned around and found Ethan watching her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. But his voice had that quality again. The unguarded version, the one that appeared only in the late hours when his careful containment had been worn down far enough that the thing underneath showed through. Go back to sleep, Clara. You've had enough of a night. She went upstairs. She did not sleep. Not for a long time, but she lay in the dark and listened to the house settle and thought about a man standing in a hallway, looking at her like she had reorganized something for him. Tom went to Silver Creek the next morning and came back by mid-afternoon, and what he brought back was worse than Clara had been ready for. He came into the kitchen, and he set his hat on the table, and he said, Ethan, I found one of the men from last night. Ethan stood up from the table. Where? Drunk at the saloon, Tom said. Not the smartest thieves I've ever come across. He talked to someone he shouldn't have talked to, who talked to Jimmy Farrell, the blacksmith who talked to me. He paused. I know who hired them. The kitchen was absolutely still. It wasn't Daniel, Tom said. They both stared at him. It was Nathan Cole, Tom said. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Clara felt the room rearrange itself around her the way rooms do when something unexpected steps into them and changes all the angles. Nathan Cole, the man who had handed her a return ticket on a platform 7 weeks ago. The man who had decided in 90 seconds that she wasn't worth keeping. Why? Ethan said. His voice was completely flat. Tom looked at him and then at Clara and then at the table. Because of the North Section water rights, he said. Cole's been in conversation with Daniel Walker's company since spring. He put money into the development deal. If Daniel gets the North Section, Cole gets a portion of the farming operation. He paused. With the note cleared by Clara's investment, Daniel's legal angle is gone. So someone decided a different kind of pressure needed to be applied. Ethan didn't say anything. Clara looked at her hands on the table. Soft hands, Nathan Cole had thought. Not suited to this. She thought about standing in the hallway with a loaded rifle at 2 a.m, and she thought about Tom Briggs saying, "You did all right, Clara." And she thought about the envelope in her bag that she still hadn't thrown away. "He was at the station," she said. "He was part of this even then." "I don't think he planned you into it," Tom said carefully. "I think what happened at the station was genuine. He did decide you weren't what he wanted. But after you came here, and especially after word got around about the investment..." He stopped. It complicated things for him. "Because I'm in the way," Clara said. "Because you solved the problem he was counting on Ethan not being able to solve," Tom said. Ethan moved. He picked up his hat from the peg by the door and put it on with the deliberate movement of a man organizing himself for something. "Ethan," Clara said. He stopped with his hand on the door. "What are you about to do?" she said. "Go talk to Nathan Cole," he said. His voice was even, but there was something underneath it she had never heard from him before, something with heat in it. "You're angry," she said. "I'm significantly beyond angry," he said. "I know," Clara said. "That's exactly why you shouldn't go yet." She stood up. "If you go to Cole now tonight, angry as you are, he'll deny everything, and you'll have shown your hand and lost the element of surprise." She paused. "You need the man Tom found. You need that man to say in front of witnesses who paid him, and you need that said somewhere official before you go anywhere near Nathan Cole." The hand on the door didn't move. "Think," she said quietly. "You've kept this ranch and these men through bad winters and a debt and your brother's interference. Don't lose your head now because someone finally made you angry enough to want to." Ethan turned around. He looked at her across the kitchen, and the heat in his face was still there. But under it, under the anger and the exhaustion and the weight of everything, was something else entirely. Something she had been watching build for 7 weeks, the same way you watch a season change, gradual, inevitable, beautiful, in a way that takes your breath if you're paying attention. "You're right," he said. "I know," she said. It came out softer than she intended. Tom Briggs cleared his throat. "I told the man at the saloon to stay put until morning," he said. "Promised him his tab would be covered. He was too drunk to question it." He looked at Ethan. "If you want his testimony somewhere official, morning's your window." Ethan looked at Clara. "Morning," she said. He took his hat back off. He sat back down at the table, and Clara poured him coffee and sat across from him, and Tom Briggs pulled a chair around. And the three of them sat together in the kitchen and made a plan. And outside, the Montana stars were refusing to be modest, and the North pasture held its water, and the ranch held its ground. And Nathan Cole in a saloon in Silver Creek had no idea yet how wrong he had calculated. Tom left before sunrise. Clara heard him go, the particular sound of a man moving quietly so as not to wake anyone, which paradoxically was always louder than just walking normally. She lay still in Ruth's bed and listened to the horse leave the yard, and then lay there in the dark, thinking about a drunk man in a Silver Creek saloon whose tab was being covered by Tom Briggs and who had until morning to stay put before he either sobered up and got scared or moved on entirely. She got up at 4:30. Same as always. Ethan was already in the kitchen. He was sitting at the table with his hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, and from the look of him, he had not slept at all. His hat was on the table beside him, which was unusual. Ethan Walker's hat was typically either on his head or on the peg by the door, and never anywhere in between, and seeing it on the table beside him like an afterthought told her more about the state of his night than anything his face was doing. She didn't say anything. She went to the stove, built it up, put fresh water on, and made coffee that was actually hot, and she set it in front of him and took the cold cup away without comment. He looked up at her. "I didn't sleep," he said. "I know," she said. "I kept thinking about Daniel," he said, wondering how much he knew. Whether he knew about Cole's plan or whether it was Cole acting independently. He paused. "Whether the brother I grew up with is capable of that." Clara sat down across from him. "Those are different questions with different answers," she said. "And you won't know the answers until Tom gets back." "I know." He turned the cup in his hands. "I keep trying to make it not what it looks like." "That's natural," she said. "He's your brother." "When we were young," Ethan said, and then he stopped and started again. "When we were boys, Daniel was the one who'd fight anybody who looked at me sideways. There was a man in town who tried to shortchange my father at the grain store once, and Daniel was 14 years old, and he walked up and told that man in front of the whole store exactly what he'd done and what kind of man that made him." He looked at the table. "I've been thinking about that all night." "People change," Clara said carefully. "They do," he said. "The question is whether they change into something unrecognizable, or whether they just make choices that look that way from the outside." He looked up at her. "I don't know which one my brother is, and it's driving me half out of my mind." "Tom will know more this morning," Clara said, "and if he comes back with confirmation." Clara held his gaze. "Then you deal with what's true," she said. "Not what you wished was true. Not what you remember being true. What is actually true right now." Ethan was quiet. He drank his coffee. She watched him take the shape of that and absorb it the way he absorbed hard things, with that particular steadiness of his that she had come to understand wasn't the absence of feeling, but feeling held at a level where it could be used rather than just survived. The men came in at 5:30 to a kitchen that smelled normal and a table that was set normal, and Clara at the stove doing what she always did, and she could see them decide collectively without speaking to take their cue from the surface of things and not ask about the night before. They had been at this ranch long enough to know that some mornings were like this, where you ate breakfast and said ordinary things, and trusted that the people who needed to be handling whatever was being handled were handling it. Billy Mack lingered after the others went out. He stood near the door with his hat in his hand and looked at Clara. "Sam's shoulder is better," he said. "Good," Clara said. "Tell him to come to the kitchen this afternoon. I want to look at it." "Clara." He paused. "Last night, what you did standing there with that rifle?" He stopped again, and she could see him searching for the words that a 19-year-old boy searches for when he's trying to say something adult. "I just wanted you to know that we noticed. The men. We all noticed." Clara looked at him. This boy with his mother in Kansas, and his half wages, and his face that still had some youth in it, despite everything it had already seen. "Go do your work, Billy," she said. "And then because he needed to hear it, you did fine last night too. Sam needed someone, and you went." Something straightened in Billy Mack's posture. He put his hat on and went out, and Clara turned back to the stove, and allowed herself exactly 10 seconds of feeling the weight of all of it, the night before the decision she'd made about the investment. The conversation she'd had with Ethan at 2 in the morning, about a brother who might have sent men to cut his fence, and then she put it away and got on with the day. Tom came back at 9:30. Clara heard the horse in the yard, and she heard Ethan go out, and she waited. She did not go to the window this time. She stayed at the kitchen table with the household accounts open in front of her, not reading them, just having something in her hands, and she waited until she heard both of them come in through the back door. She looked at Tom's face first. Tom Briggs. 21 years on this land, a man who kept his expressions locked down tighter than the barn in a blizzard. His face right now told her everything before he said a word. "The man talked," Tom said. He sat down heavily at the table like the trip had cost him something beyond the ride. Talked clear once he'd sobered up enough to be coherent. "I had Jim Halliday from the land office with me as a witness, Ethan. I took the liberty. I hope you don't mind." "You did right," Ethan said. He was standing at the far end of the kitchen with his arms at his side still. "The man's name is Roy Sutter," Tom said. "He and 2 others were hired 11 days ago. Paid in advance, half up front, half on completion." He paused. Hired by Nathan Cole. Cole told them what the operation was, how the land ran, where the fence was weakest, what time the men would be sleeping. He looked at Ethan. Cole had detailed information about this ranch, Ethan. The kind you don't get from riding past. The kitchen was completely quiet. Daniel, Ethan said. Just the name. Just the one word. Tom's jaw worked. Sutter said Cole mentioned a partner in the arrangement. He didn't give a name, but he said the partner was local. Someone who'd been to the ranch recently. The silence that followed was the worst kind, the kind where everyone in the room has already arrived at the same place, and nobody wants to be the first one to say it out loud. Clara said it. Daniel was here twice in the past month, she said. He's the only person who came to this ranch as a visitor who would have known that information. Ethan turned away. He put one hand flat on the wall and stood there for a moment with his back to both of them, and Clara watched his shoulders and waited. Tom looked at her. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Wait. Let him be. After a moment, Ethan straightened. He turned back around. His face had gone through something while his back was turned and come out the other side, not resolved, not easy, but decided. That was the difference. The deciding was done. What does Halliday say? He said. Is Sutter's testimony enough for legal action against Cole's? For the theft, yes, Tom said. Halliday thinks so. Cole organized and paid for a cattle theft. Sutter's willing to testify because Cole only paid the first half, and Sutter is not a man of principle so much as a man of arithmetic. Tom's voice was dry. As for Daniel, if Cole gives him up, that's another matter. If he doesn't, Daniel's cleaner than he should be. Cole will give him up, Clara said. Both men looked at her. The moment real legal pressure is applied, she said Nathan Cole is not going to protect Daniel Walker out of loyalty. He made a business decision. When that decision starts costing him more than it was supposed to, he'll make another business decision. She paused. Cole is not brave. He demonstrated that on the platform 7 weeks ago. Ethan looked at her for a moment. Something in his face shifted that quality again, the one that appeared when she said something that landed precisely where he needed something to land. You're not wrong, he said quietly. I know, she said. You keep saying that. Ethan said, and the edge of something that might have been a smile moved across his face, despite everything. Someone should, Clara said. Tom cleared his throat. Halliday can be at the sheriff's office at 2 o'clock this afternoon if we want to move on this today. We do, Ethan said. They went to Silver Creek at noon, all three of them, which Clara had not planned, but which Tom made clear without stating directly, was the right arrangement. Having you there, he told her quietly while Ethan was getting the wagon, steadies him. You know that, don't you? Clara did not answer that question. She climbed up onto the wagon seat. The Silver Creek sheriff was a man named Harold Pruitt, somewhere between 50 and 60, with a long face and a manner that suggested he had seen enough of human nature's worst inclinations to be unsurprisable. He listened to Tom's account read Halliday's written statement from Roy Sutter and sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at Ethan. Cole's a prominent man in this county, he said. You understand what you're starting. I understand what he started, Ethan said. It'll get public. It'll get loud. People are going to have opinions. People always have opinions, Clara said from beside Ethan. Sheriff Pruitt looked at her. He had the look of a man who had been told about her the mail-order bride situation, the platform Walker's housekeeper, and was recalibrating what he'd been told against what he was seeing. Miss Whitmore, he said. Sheriff, she said. You're willing to give a statement about the night of the theft, what you witnessed, what you did. I'm willing to give a complete and accurate statement, she said. Yes. He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Ethan. All right, he said. He opened his desk drawer and found his pen. Let's start from the beginning. They were there for 2 hours. Clara gave her statement clearly and without embellishment, describing exactly what she had seen and heard and done, from the sound that woke her to the rifle in her hands to Tom's report that morning. Ethan gave his. Tom gave his. Halliday's written testimony from Sutter was entered. When it was done, Sheriff Pruitt said he would bring Nathan Cole in for questioning that afternoon. They drove back to the ranch in silence for the first 10 minutes. Then Billy Mack, who had been watching the road from the fence line, saw them coming and ran to meet them, which was how the rest of the men knew something significant had happened. And by the time the wagon pulled in, all 5 of them were in the yard, with the expression of people who have been waiting for news without knowing how to ask for it. Ethan got down from the wagon and looked at his men. "Sheriff Pruitt is questioning Nathan Cole this afternoon about the theft," he said. "We have testimony from one of the men who did it. Cole hired them." He paused. "There may also be an inquiry into whether Daniel was involved in organizing it." The yard was quiet. Then Hector Reyes said something in Spanish that was clearly not appropriate for polite company and sat down on the nearest fence post. Pete Donnelly said, "Cole, I never did like that man." "Nobody asked you, Pete," Sam said. "Nobody had to." Billy Mack was looking at Ethan, and his face had that 19-year-old transparency that Clara had come to find one of the most honest things on this ranch. "Are we all right?" he said. "The ranch. Are we all right?" Ethan looked at him. "The note is cleared," he said. "The legal threat from Daniel's company is gone. We lost 6 head in the theft, and we'll recover them over the next season." He paused. "Yeah, Billy. We're all right." Billy Mack let out a breath that he had apparently been holding for about 3 weeks. Sam Donnelly clapped him on the back. Tom Briggs looked at Clara with November Creek eyes that had warmed several degrees since the morning she'd first met him, and she looked back at him, and they didn't need to say anything. What came next was not what any of them expected. 3 days after Sheriff Pruitt's questioning of Nathan Cole, a letter arrived at the ranch addressed to Clara. She almost didn't open it when she saw the return address. But she did because she was not a woman who avoided things, and because not knowing was always worse. It was from Daniel Walker. Not long, a single page in handwriting that was neater than she would have expected from a man she had decided was not careful about the damage he caused. She read it standing at the kitchen table. Then she read it again. Then she sat down. Ethan came in 20 minutes later and found her sitting there with the letter in front of her. He looked at the letter. He looked at her face. "What is it?" She handed it to him. He read it. She watched his face while he read it, which was the better document. It moved through several things: recognition resistance, something complex that she couldn't name, and then a long stillness at the end. He set it down. Daniel's letter said 3 things. First, that he had not known Cole intended to arrange a theft. He had known Cole was in the development deal, and had known Cole was frustrated by the situation at the ranch, but he had not known Cole's plan and would not have sanctioned it. Second, that his own role in pressuring Ethan about the land had been wrong, and that the pressure had come from his own financial stakes in the deal, which he had allowed to matter more than his brother. Third, and this was the part that had made Clara sit down, that the development company had withdrawn from their arrangement with Cole after the legal trouble, and that Cole was now managing the consequences of that alone. The deal that Cole had risked a criminal action to protect had dissolved anyway, because the company did not want the association with a cattle theft charge. Nathan Cole had gambled everything on a scheme that had already fallen apart by the time the scheme itself was discovered. "Do you believe him?" Clara asked. "About not knowing Cole's plan." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "I want to," he said. "That's not the same thing." "No," Clara said. "It's not. He still came here twice trying to take the north section. He still went to the bank. He still worked with Cole on the development deal, knowing what it would mean for this ranch." "All of that's true," Clara said. "But he didn't send those men." "I believe that part," Clara said. "The letter sounds like a man who's been badly frightened by what almost happened and is trying to separate himself from it clearly. That's different from innocence, but it's also different from the worst thing he could have done." Ethan read the letter again. "He says he wants to come and talk," he said. "I saw that. What do you think?" Clara considered this carefully because it mattered, and because Ethan was asking her, and not as a courtesy. I think she said that brothers who grew up fighting other people's battles for each other don't become strangers easily. I think whatever he became in Denver, there's something left of who he was before he went. She paused. I also think you'll regret it more if you refuse than if you try. Ethan was quiet for a long time. I'll think about it, he said. She nodded. That was right. He should think about it. This was not her brother and not her decision, and she had already done more than her part in the business of the Walker Ranch and its complications, and she knew when to hold the ground she was standing on and when to let someone else walk their own road. She took the letter back, folded it, and set it on the edge of the table where he could find it when he was ready. What happened 4 days after the letter was the thing nobody saw coming. Clara was in the yard in the late afternoon speaking with Tom about the supply run for the following week, when Margaret Fuller from the general store drove up in a wagon. This was unusual enough that Tom went still beside Clara, and they both watched her come. Margaret Fuller climbed down with the particular purposefulness of a woman who has decided to do something and has not left room for herself to change her mind. She had a package under her arm that looked like a parcel of folded fabric. "Miss Whitmore," she said. "Mrs. Fuller," Clara said. "This is unexpected. Can I offer you—" "I'm not staying for pleasantries," Margaret Fuller said. "I want to say something, and I want to say it quick, because I've been working up to it for a week, and if I stop, I might not start again." She held out the package. "That's fabric. Good wool. Know the right weight for fall. Not that Navy disaster you arrived in something practical. I'm not a seamstress, but I know what the dry goods are worth, and I'm giving you the cost at cost." She paused. What Nathan Cole did at that station 7 weeks ago, and what he did more recently with those hired men, is not how people ought to be treated, and I didn't say so at the time, and I should have. Clara looked at her. She thought about the extra pound of sugar added to her order on that first supply run. "You did say something," Clara said. "In your way." "Not enough," Margaret Fuller said. "And I'm saying more now." She pushed the package further toward Clara. "You've done right by this town, and by this ranch, and by those men out there, and I want you to have something that was given freely, and not because you needed it." Clara took the package. It was heavier than it looked, several yards of good gray wool, and a dark green that she would not have thought to choose for herself, but which she immediately understood was exactly right. "Thank you," she said. "I mean that sincerely." "I know you do," Margaret Fuller said. She gave Tom Briggs a brief nod, which Tom received with the gravity it deserved, and then she climbed back in her wagon and drove away. Tom looked at the package in Clara's arms, and then at the retreating wagon. "Margaret Fuller has never given anything at cost in 20 years of running that store," he said. "Don't tell her I know that," Clara said. "Wouldn't dream of it." She took the fabric upstairs and put it in the chest at the foot of the bed, and she sat on the edge of the bed for a moment with her hands in her lap, and thought about a woman in Boston who had answered a marriage advertisement, because she had nothing left, and had ridden a train for 3 days, sitting on a hard seat, eating almost nothing, because every penny had to last. That woman felt very far away. Not gone, not forgotten, but far away. The conversation she had been not having with Ethan Walker for 7 weeks came to a head on a Thursday evening in September, which was also the evening that Nathan Cole came to the ranch. Clara did not know he was coming. She did not think Ethan knew either, because she heard the horse from inside, and she heard Ethan go to the door, and his first words were Cole, with a flatness and surprise mixed together that you can't perform. She stayed in the kitchen. She told herself this firmly. She stayed at the basin, and she washed the supper dishes, and she did not listen. She listened. "I'm not here to defend myself," Nathan Cole said. His voice came through the window, and it sounded different from the voice she'd heard on the platform. Smaller. "I know what I did. I know it was wrong. I'm facing the legal consequences, and I'm not here to ask you to intercede or to reduce them." "Then why are you here?" Ethan's voice. A pause. "To apologize," Nathan Cole said. "To you. And to her." Silence. "She's not your concern," Ethan said. His voice had that edge in it, the heat she'd heard only once before the night Tom came back with the news. "She is," Cole said. What I did at that station that's separate from the rest of it. She came here in good faith. She answered my letters honestly, and I made a decision in 90 seconds in front of a crowd, and I handled it badly. He paused. I handled her badly, and then I handled the situation afterward even worse. Another silence. I'd like to speak to her, Cole said. If she'll allow it. If you'll allow it. Clara dried her hands. She folded the cloth. She walked through the house to the front door and opened it. Nathan Cole was standing in the yard with his hat in his hands. He looked smaller than she remembered him on the platform. Not physically, he was the same man, but reduced in some way that the intervening weeks had worked on him. The confident looseness she had read as ownership on the platform was gone, replaced by something more contracted. He looked at her. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Cole? She said. I owe you an apology, he said. More than one. The station and what happened after. He didn't look away from her face, which she gave him credit for. I made a judgment that was wrong, and I made it in a way that was public and unkind. And then I made choices after that were worse. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I'm just telling you that I know what I did. Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the things she could say. She had thought about this conversation in various versions since the day it happened, and she had imagined herself sharp in it, precise the things she had wanted to say on the platform finally given room. What she actually felt standing here looking at Nathan Cole in the September evening was tired of carrying it. You were wrong, she said. About all of it. About me on that platform and about what came after. She paused. I don't have anger left for you, Mr. Cole. I've been too busy for the past 7 weeks to keep it warm. She paused again. I hope you figure out what kind of man you want to be when this is finished. Nathan Cole looked at her. Something in his face that was not quite relief and not quite pain settled into something she thought was probably honesty. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. He put his hat back on. He looked at Ethan. Something passed between them, not warmth, not forgiveness, not yet, but the acknowledgement of two men who have known each other a long time and are arriving at a new accounting of that knowledge. Then he rode away. Ethan and Clara stood in the yard and watched him go. The evening was cooling down the way September evenings do in Montana, the first edge of the season that was coming, and the light was doing the things it did out here that she still didn't have names for. You didn't have to do that, Ethan said. I know, she said. You could have refused to see him. I could have, she said. But I've been carrying what happened on that platform every day since it happened, and I'm done carrying it. Letting him apologize was for me as much as for him. Ethan was quiet. They were standing close enough that she was aware of it the way you become aware of proximity, when proximity has started to mean something different from what it meant before. Your 3 months are up next week, he said. She had known this. She had been aware of it for 2 weeks, the way you are aware of a thing you are not looking at directly. Yes, she said. The partnership terms we agreed on don't require you to stay, he said. You're a stakeholder in the operation, but that doesn't obligate your time or your presence. Whitfield's investment is protected regardless of where you are. I know, she said. So you could go, he said. If you wanted to. You could go back to Boston or go anywhere, and it would be right. You came here with 3 months in mind, and you've done more than anyone had the right to ask. Clara looked at the north slope, where the cattle were settling for the evening, on the land that was now secured, that the water would continue to feed, that the banknote no longer threatened. She thought about the accounting book with her handwriting in it. She thought about Sam Donnelly's letter, and Margaret Fuller's fabric, and the extra pound of sugar that was its own kind of statement. She thought about Tom Briggs saying you did all right, Clara, in the middle of the worst night. She thought about a man at a kitchen basin saying I'll dry without being asked. Ethan, she said. Yeah. Stop talking around it, she said. Whatever you're trying to ask me, ask me. The silence stretched for a long moment. The evening air moved. Somewhere in the direction of the bunkhouse, a door opened and closed, and she thought she probably heard Tom Briggs very deliberately going somewhere that wasn't near a window. "Do you want to stay?" Ethan said. Not around it this time. Direct the way she'd asked him to be. Not because you have nowhere to go, not because of the investment, not because of the men or the ranch or anything practical. He paused. "Do you want to stay?" She turned and looked at him. This man, who had held his hat in both hands on a train platform and stepped forward when he didn't have to. Who put wood by the kitchen door and left coffee on the stove in the morning and said, "I'll dry at the end of a hard day." Who had carried his ranch and his men through everything this summer. On shoulders that were steadier than anyone had the right to be, who had gray-blue eyes that looked at things and actually saw them, which was rarer than people understood. "Yes," she said. It came out simple. It was simple. She had known the answer for weeks and had been waiting for the right moment to let it be said. Ethan looked at her. The contained quality of his face had shifted just slightly, the way a held breath releases, not dramatic, not sudden. Just the quiet ease of something that had been held for a long time, finally finding permission to let go. He reached out. He took her hand. Not dramatically. Not the way stories about love are supposed to go. He just reached out and took her hand, the way you take hold of something you want to stop worrying about losing. And he held it, and they stood in the September evening on the Walker Ranch with the cattle on the north slope, and the stars beginning overhead, and the particular silence of a place that has found its own right shape. "I should tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. "I went to the station that day for feed supplies," he said. "The train being there was coincidence." "I know," she said. "But when I saw you on that platform—" He stopped. He started again. "It wasn't entirely practical, the offer I made you." He looked at her directly. "I want you to know that. It wasn't entirely practical." Clara thought about the man who had told himself it was practical on the road home and at the dinner table and at the dish basin. She thought about how much work it must have taken to maintain that particular story for 7 weeks. "I know that too," she said. He almost smiled. "You knew." "I noticed," she said. "You know this about me by now." "I do," he said. He squeezed her hand once gently, the way a person does when they want to say something that words aren't quite built for. "I do know that." Behind them inside the house, the stove was warm, and the kitchen smelled of the supper they had just eaten, and the coffee that was always on. And in the bunkhouse the Donnelly brothers were arguing about something that didn't matter. And Billy Mack was writing a letter to his mother, and Tom Briggs was sitting on the bunkhouse step, looking at the sky with the expression of a man who has decided that things on balance are going to be all right. And in the yard of the Walker Ranch, on a Thursday evening in September 1884, a woman who had arrived with one suitcase and a worn Bible and a letter promising a new beginning stood holding the hand of a man who had been waiting without knowing it for exactly this, and neither of them spoke, because everything that mattered had already been said, and what remained was simply the beginning of what came next. The week after Nathan Cole rode away from the Walker Ranch was the quietest week Clara had known since arriving in Montana. Not empty quiet, not the quiet of nothing happening. The quiet of things that have been wound very tight for a very long time, finally being allowed to unwind, the particular release of a household that has been braced for impact and can now carefully stand down. Tom Briggs fixed the loose front step on Monday morning. Clara heard the hammering and came to the door and looked at him, and he said without looking up from the nail he was driving, "Ethan's been meaning to do this since June." She almost said, "I know he told me." Instead, she said, "Thank you, Tom," and went back inside, and the step didn't wobble anymore, and that small solid fact felt like something. Sam Donnelly got a letter back from the woman in Nebraska on Tuesday. Clara knew because she heard him reading it in the kitchen when he thought she was in the yard reading it quietly to himself, with the particular focus of someone who is trying to memorize something at the same time as understanding it. She made extra noise coming back through the door to give him time to put it away, and at supper he was so thoroughly transparently happy that even Pete noticed. "Sam's grinning at his beans," Pete said. "Mind your business," Sam said. "It is my business. I live with you." "Then maybe move out." "Maybe I will." You won't. You're right, I won't. Clara refilled the coffee and said nothing and caught Ethan's eye across the table, and he looked down at his cup, but not before she saw the thing that moved in his face, the ease of a man in the place he belongs. On Wednesday, Daniel Walker came. He didn't send a letter ahead this time. He just rode up the north road in the mid-morning and tied his horse at the post and stood there, hat in his hand, and waited for someone to come out. Clara was the one who saw him from the kitchen window, and she stood still for a moment looking at him, this younger version of Ethan City, polished in ways Ethan was not, but with something underneath the polish that was the same material. She went to find Ethan. He was in the barn. She stood in the doorway and said, "Your brother is here." She said it plainly without inflection, so he could hear it without having to manage her reaction at the same time as his own. Ethan set down what he was doing. He stood there for a moment, with his hands at his sides. Then he said, "Did he look? How did he look?" Clara thought about this honestly. "He looked like a man who doesn't know if he's welcome and came anyway," she said, "which is harder than knowing you're not welcome in some ways." Ethan was quiet. Then he walked past her out of the barn, and Clara stayed where she was, and she heard them meet in the yard, and she heard the silence between the first footsteps and the first words, which was long enough to contain everything two brothers have ever said to each other and not said. "Ethan," Daniel said. "Daniel," Ethan said. Another silence. "I shouldn't have come back here the way I did," Daniel said. "Either time. With Alcott with the paperwork, I handled it like a business transaction instead of like what it was." His voice was different from the smooth city voice she had heard through the kitchen window on his visits. Still the same voice, but with the surface layer worn off it. "I told myself the deal was good for you, that selling the north section was the practical solution. I believed it, Ethan. I want you to know that. I believed what I was telling you, but you knew what it would do to the water," Ethan said. A pause. "Yes. You knew, and you told yourself it was practical anyway." "Yes." Quieter this time. "Because you had money in the deal," Ethan said. Not a question. "Yes." The quietest yet. Clara heard Ethan take a breath. The kind that comes from the chest, slow, like a man measuring what he says next against what he actually means. "I know you didn't plan what Cole did," he said. "I believe that. But you opened the door to a man who walked through it and used it badly, and that happened because you let your investment matter more than this place and the people in it." "I know," Daniel said. "And more than me," Ethan said. Simple, not dramatic, just true, and put on the table between them where it had to go. The silence that followed was the longest of all. Clara stood in the barn doorway, with her hand on the frame, and she thought about her mother saying some things have to be said out loud before they can be gotten past. And she thought about how right her mother had been about almost everything. "I know that too," Daniel said. His voice had cracked slightly on the last word, not breaking entirely, but bending the way something bends before it breaks or before it holds. "I'm not asking you to forget it. I'm asking if there's a way through it." Ethan was quiet for what felt like a very long time. "You'd have to come back," Ethan said finally. "Not to Denver and back. Here, working this land the way you used to. Not because I need the help, I've got good men, but because I don't know how to trust what you tell me from a distance anymore." Clara heard Daniel Walker make a sound she couldn't quite name. Not a sob, and not a laugh, but something between them, the sound a person makes when they have been braced for a harder answer, and the one they get instead unravels them a little. "I can do that," Daniel said. "If you'll have me." "I'll think on it," Ethan said. "That's the best I can give you right now." "That's more than I came expecting," Daniel said. Clara went back to the kitchen. She heard Daniel ride away 20 minutes later, and she heard Ethan come in through the back door and stand in the kitchen, and she kept her back to him for a moment to give him the privacy of a face that was working through something. Then she turned around. He looked wrung out. Not broken. Ethan Walker didn't break in any direction she'd yet discovered, but the kind of wrung out that comes after you've held yourself at a very precise level of control for a very important conversation, and then the conversation is over. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She put coffee in front of him and sat across from him and didn't say anything. After a while he said, "I told him I'd think on it." "I heard," she said. He looked at her. "Were you listening the whole time?" "I was standing in the barn doorway," she said. "I wasn't going to come any closer, but I wasn't going to be far either." He absorbed this. "Thank you," he said, "for telling me how he looked, before I went out. It helped." "I know," she said. He almost smiled. "You keep saying that." "You keep giving me opportunities to," she said. He drank his coffee. She watched him come back to himself by degrees, the way people do when something difficult is over and the ordinary world reasserts itself around them. "I think I'll let him come back," Ethan said. "Eventually. I'm not ready today. Maybe not next month." He paused. "But eventually." "That sounds right," Clara said. "My mother would want it," he said. She doesn't know most of what happened this summer. She's in Colorado with her sister. I need to write to her." "You should," Clara said. "She's going to have feelings about all of it," he said. "About Daniel, about Cole, about—" He stopped. He looked at Clara across the table. "About you," he said. "She's going to have feelings about you." Clara held his gaze. "What kind of feelings?" "The kind a mother has," Ethan said, "when her son has been alone longer than was good for him and then is suddenly less alone." He paused. "Good feelings. I think she'll want to meet you." Clara felt something warm move through her chest. She kept her expression even, which required moderate effort. "I look forward to it," she said. Ethan nodded slowly the way he did when he was deciding something. "Clara," he said. "Yes. I've been trying to find the right time to say something," he said. "I've been trying to find it for about 3 weeks, and I keep deciding it's not right yet, and then another week goes by, and I reckon, if I wait for the perfect moment, I'll be waiting until spring." Clara set down her cup and looked at him with her full attention, which she suspected he could feel because he had the look of a man who is very aware of being looked at. "I love you," he said. Just that. Just 3 words stated with the same directness he used for everything that mattered. No performance, no elaborate delivery. Just Ethan Walker saying a true thing. The way he always said true things clearly and without ornamentation. Clara looked at him. She felt the full weight of it, the words and the man behind them, and the 7 weeks that had built to this moment, the platform and the wagon ride, and the kitchen, and the dishes, and the lamplight, and the account book, and the rifle in the hallway, and the hand in the September yard. "I love you too," she said. "I've known it for about a month. I was waiting for you to catch up." Ethan stared at her. Then something happened in his face that she had not seen before. A full, open, unheld thing. The smile that wasn't contained or partial, but complete. And it changed every line of him. And she understood looking at it, that she had been waiting to see it without knowing she was waiting. "A month," he said. "At least," she said. "And you didn't say anything." "Neither did you." He laughed. It was a real laugh, short and surprised, the laugh of a man who doesn't do it often enough. And the sound of it did something to the kitchen air that Clara thought the kitchen had probably needed for a long time. "Fair enough," he said. What none of them had anticipated was that the news would arrive in Silver Creek before Ethan had a chance to announce anything. It was Tom Briggs's fault, which Tom freely acknowledged. He had been at the general store on Friday morning picking up the week's supplies, and Margaret Fuller had asked him directly, in the way Margaret Fuller asked everything, which left no graceful avenue of evasion, how things were standing at the Walker Ranch. And Tom, 21 years a rancher, and a man of exceptional practical competence, had apparently looked at Margaret Fuller's face and lost his footing entirely. He told Clara about it that evening with the expression of a man turning himself in. "She asked me how you were doing," he said. "And I said you were doing well, and that it seemed like you'd be staying on. And she said, "Was that so?" And I said, "Yes. It looked like things had worked out the way they ought to." And she said she was glad to hear it, and I said it was about time, and she said she agreed, and... He stopped. I may have said more than I strictly meant to. Clara looked at him. "How much more?" "Enough that she was smiling when I left the store," Tom said. The particular kind of smiling where a person already knows what they are about to tell everyone they see. Clara pressed her lips together. She was not going to laugh. She was very near to laughing. "I wanted to tell you before Ethan found out," Tom said, "because when Margaret Fuller smiles like that, the information reaches half the county by Thursday, and I thought you deserved some warning." "Thank you, Tom," Clara managed. He put his hat on. "I'll go tell Ethan," he said with the resigned dignity of a man walking toward something uncomfortable because it is the right thing to do. She did laugh after he left. She laughed alone in the kitchen until her eyes watered, and then she washed her face at the basin and got on with supper. And 20 minutes later, she heard from the direction of the barn the sound of Ethan's voice and Tom's voice and a pause, and then, faintly undeniably, Ethan laughing too. The twist that Silver Creek had not seen coming arrived on a Sunday morning, and it arrived in the form of a letter. Not a telegraph this time. A proper letter on good stationery from Arthur Whitfield in Boston. Clara opened it at the kitchen table while Ethan was out doing the morning cattle check, and what she read made her put it down flat on the table and sit back in her chair and stare at the ceiling for a full 30 seconds. Arthur Whitfield had been doing what Arthur Whitfield did, which was manage money carefully and pay attention to where value was growing. He had been watching the Walker Ranch's situation since making the investment not closely, but with the attention of a man who understands that a small stake in a well-run operation is worth more than a large stake in a poorly managed one. And he had been in correspondence, it turned out, with a land development group out of Chicago. Not Daniel Walker's company, a different one entirely larger and more legitimate that was looking to invest in established Montana cattle operations as the territory prepared for statehood. They were interested in the Walker Ranch. Not to buy it, not to take the land, to invest. A substantial sum in exchange for a minority stake and no management involvement. The kind of arrangement that would give Ethan Walker the capital to expand the herd, repair the fencing properly, hire 2 additional hands for the coming season, and build the operation to the scale it had always had the land to support, but not the resources. Whitfield had written to ask Clara if she thought the rancher would be open to discussing it. Clara read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it precisely and held it in her hands and looked at it. She thought about the account book. She thought about the numbers she had done by lamplight in Ruth's room in those first weeks. She thought about the cattle on the north slope, and the water that fed them, and a ranch that had held on through a bad winter, and a brother's pressure, and a banknote, and a theft, and had held on because of the men in it, and the land under them, and a woman who had shown up on a train with soft hands, and her father's practical insistence on knowing how to handle things. She was still sitting there when Ethan came in from the morning check. He saw her face first. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said. "Sit down." He sat. She handed him the letter. She watched him read it. She watched his eyes move down the page and stop and move back up and then down again. She watched his jaw tighten and then ease and then tighten again. She watched him get to the bottom of the page and sit very still for a moment. "Whitfield's recommending this," he said. "He is. He thinks it's legitimate." "Arthur Whitfield has been managing money carefully for 30 years, Clara said. "He doesn't recommend things he doesn't believe in." Ethan looked at the letter again. "This would change things," he said. "Yes. The herd could double in 2 seasons with this kind of capital," he said more to himself than to her, the rancher's mind running the arithmetic automatically. "The north fence needs full replacement, not just repair. If we had 2 more hands we could—" He stopped himself. He looked at her. "This came because of your investment," he said. "Because of you." "It came because the ranch earned it," Clara said. "The investment just made it visible." "Clara." "Ethan, stop deflecting credit you earned," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Write to Whitfield," she said. "Tell him you're interested in discussing terms. Let him arrange the meeting. Then decide." She paused. "But it's your ranch and your decision. Don't say yes because of me. Say yes because the numbers make sense." "The numbers make sense," he said immediately. "Then say yes." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the same way he had in the September yard. The same unhurried certainty of a man taking hold of something he intends to stop worrying about losing. "I'm going to ask you something," he said. "All right. And I want you to answer without deflecting credit or talking about the ranch's best interests or telling me you know," he said. "Just the answer." Clara looked at his hand over hers. She looked at his face. "All right," she said again. "Will you marry me?" he said. Not a performance, not a speech. Just Ethan Walker saying a true thing, the way he always said true things, directly, clearly, with his gray-blue eyes looking at her, and actually seeing her the way they always had from the first moment on the platform before he knew a single thing about her except how she stood. Clara thought about the return ticket that was still in her bag upstairs. She had never thrown it away. She had kept it the way you keep something that reminds you of the distance you have traveled, not to go back, but to know how far forward you have come. "Yes," she said. One word. The same way he had said "I love you," no embellishment, just the true thing clearly stated. He squeezed her hand once. She felt it through her whole arm. They told the men that evening at supper. Ethan said it simply midway through the meal, the way he said everything that mattered. "Clara's agreed to marry me. I wanted you all to know." The table was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Pete Donnelly said, "Finally." "Pete," Sam said. "What?" "We've all been thinking it since August. Speak for yourself." "I'm speaking for the table, Sam." "Well, the table should maybe—" "Lord Almighty," Billy Mack said, and this time Tom Briggs didn't correct his language. Just looked at Clara with November Creek eyes that had gone full summer warm all the way through and raised his coffee cup in the smallest, most dignified, most Tom Briggs possible gesture of acknowledgement. Hector Reyes stood up from his chair. He walked around the table to where Clara was sitting, and he took her hand and bowed over it with a formality and grace that belonged to somewhere finer than a ranch kitchen in Montana. And when he straightened, his eyes were bright, and he said something in Spanish that Clara didn't speak well enough to follow entirely, but caught enough of to understand that it was something about home, and about welcome, and about this being the right place, and she had to press her lips together hard to hold herself together. "Thank you, Hector," she said. He nodded and sat back down and picked up his fork, and that was that, except that he refilled everyone's coffee twice, and nobody commented on it. They were married in Silver Creek on the first Saturday of October in the small church on the far end of the main street in front of most of the town, because Margaret Fuller had, as Tom predicted, shared the information thoroughly, and Silver Creek turned out for occasions with the enthusiasm of a place that understood collective moments. Clara wore the dark green wool from Margaret Fuller's parcel, which fit perfectly because she had made it fit herself, sitting at the kitchen table in the evenings with Ruth Hadley's sewing kit that she had found in the chest at the foot of the bed, and asked Ethan quietly if she might use. He had said yes without asking why, which was how he handled most things. Tom Briggs stood up with Ethan. Billy Mack cried during the vows, and later denied it with the committed conviction of a 19-year-old man for whom crying during someone else's wedding is both completely understandable and completely inadmissible. Pete Donnelly did not cry. He simply shook Ethan's hand afterward and looked at Clara and said, "The salt on the right shelf is better. You were right about the damp." Clara laughed and kissed him on the cheek, which made him go so red that Sam laughed for approximately the next 4 hours. Margaret Fuller gave them a gift, a good wool blanket, heavy and dark blue, folded and wrapped in paper. She presented it to Clara without ceremony and said, "For the cold that's coming. Montana winters don't negotiate." Clara thanked her and meant it, and Margaret Fuller made a sound that was probably her version of "You're welcome," and went to find the coffee. After the ceremony, after the town had celebrated in the particular Silver Creek way, loud, brief, warm, then dispersing, because livestock don't care that it's Saturday. Clara and Ethan stood outside the church in the October afternoon, and the light was doing what October light did in Montana, which was make everything look like something worth keeping. She had the return ticket in her coat pocket. She had put it there that morning deliberately, one last time. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked. He had gotten good at reading when she was thinking something specific. She had gotten good at letting him. She pulled the ticket from her pocket and looked at it. Boston to Silver Creek, dated July 1884. The paper worn soft at the fold lines from 7 weeks of sitting in her bag. She had never used it. She had never intended to use it. Not really. Not from the day she turned around on the platform and decided that whatever came next, she was going to build it herself. She held it up between them. Then she looked at Ethan. Then she let it go. It caught the October air and rose slightly before settling to the ground, and neither of them reached for it, and after a moment, the wind took it further down the street and it was gone. "I don't need that anymore," she said. Ethan looked at the place it had been, then at her. The full, unheld smile was there, the real one, the complete one, the one she had been waiting to see without knowing she was waiting. "No," he said. "You don't." He took her hand. They walked back up the street of Silver Creek, Montana, in the first week of October, 1884. Past the general store where Margaret Fuller was already back behind her counter, past the sheriff's office, where Harold Pruitt raised a hand in acknowledgement, past the spot on the platform where a woman had stood 7 weeks ago, with a return ticket in her hand and a town full of eyes that expected her to fold. She had not folded. She had turned around. She had walked toward a quiet voice, and a steady man, and a kitchen that needed managing, and 5 men who needed someone to call them by name, and a ranch that needed saving, and a life that turned out to be exactly the one she was built for, waiting in a place she hadn't known to look. The woman who arrived in Silver Creek as a rejected mail-order bride, soft-handed city bred, not what anyone expected, became the woman who saved the ranch, faced down the thieves, cleared the debt, and stood in a hallway with a loaded rifle at 2 a.m, without once asking permission to be taken seriously. Because she had never needed permission. She had only ever needed the chance. And a cowboy on a train platform who was paying attention when everyone else was looking away. He had seen that from the very first moment. And everything that followed was simply the world catching up to what he already knew. That is how the greatest love stories work. Not the ones where someone arrives and rescues you. The ones where someone sees who you already are and simply makes room.